All right, and we're back for another session here. We're going to do episode 9, it looks like, here. So this is Vexing Cat. I'm here going to be reading Bram Stoker's Dracula. We're going to continue where we left off. Here is the cover. I'm reading from the Library of Congress copy of the 1897 copyright edition of Dracula. Here we go. So, where we kind of left off last session or last episode, we were discussing or we were reading up to the point where Lucy is going through a lot of trauma. She's being bled dry every night. They've done multiple transfusions. Uh, the good doctor Van Helsing, Arthur, um, and then of course the other doctor that is best friends with Van Helsing, whose name escapes me at this exact second. Dr. Seward. There we go. So Dr. Seward, Van Helsing, and Arthur, her fiance, are doing everything they can to take care of her. And of course, we've got. Let's see here. We also have Mina. The situation with Mina is Jonathan Harker, her fiance, has turned up. He is in a medical facility slash insane asylum. He got off the train, um, raving, delirious from blood loss. He was suffering greatly, and the medical personnel there that didn't speak English, they took him in and got him the care that he needed, hydration, food, and a quiet, peaceful place to be. And then they found his letter to Mina and sent it off to her, or he dictated to the nurse and she wrote it down, and she wrote her own little note about keeping him calm and not referring to anything. And then all of his notes in his journal from Count Dracula are written in a book, and Mina has boxed that up, wrapped it up in paper and twine, and it's like, we won't look at this unless we need to. So, also, I just want to say thank you to anybody who's stopping by, anybody new. Welcome to the channel. I have been reading Bram Stoker's Dracula for a few episodes now. I believe the last 3 are up on my Twitch page, and I'm a little bit behind on posting them onto my other socials, but I'm working on it, guys. I'm working on it. I came up with a new plan about only doing a chapter at a time being released onto YouTube, and I think that method will probably work easier for me to edit, because a 2.5, 3.5 hour block is a bit taxing to edit in one continuous stream and then post it in one continuous stream. It takes a lot to download, it takes a lot to upload, and it's just going to be faster, because then as I finish each chapter, I can just release it then and there. So let's see here. I did a little quick recap on what happened last time. As a friendly reminder, stay hydrated. My beverage goblin choices today are a spruce tip soda, because your girl is strange, and then also I have some watermelon salt water for electrolytes. So a little bit of balance, some sugar, some healthy water, do what you can. Okay, and let's get started here. So, we are resuming Bram Stoker's Dracula. Set up the mic there. Okay. Chapter 11. Lucy Westenra's Diary. 12 September. How good they are all to me. How good they all are to me. I quite love that dear Dr. Van Helsing. I wonder why he is so anxious about these flowers. He positively frightened me. He was so fierce. And yet he must have been right, for I feel comfort from them already. Somehow I do not dread being alone tonight, and I can go to sleep without fear. I shall not mind any flapping outside the window. Oh, the terrible struggle that I have had against sleep so often of late. The pain of the sleeplessness, or the pain of the fear of sleep. with such unknown horrors as it has for me, how blessed are some people, whose lives have no fears, no dreads, to whom sleep is a blessing that comes nightly and brings nothing but sweet dreams. Well, here I am tonight, hoping for sleep and lying like Ophelia in the play, with virgin krantz and maiden struments. I never liked garlic before, but tonight it is delightful. There is a peace in its smell. I feel sleep coming already. Good night, everybody. Dr. Seward's Diary, 13 September. Called at the Berkeley and found Van Helsing, as usual, up to time. The carriage ordered from the hotel was waiting. The professor took his bag, which he always brings with him now. Let all be put down exactly. Van Helsing and I arrived at Hillingham at 8 o'clock. It was a lovely morning. The bright sunshine and all the fresh feeling of early autumn seemed like the completion of nature's annual work. The leaves were turning to all kinds of beautiful colors, but had not yet begun to drop from the trees. When we entered, we met Mrs. Westenra coming out of the morning room. She is always an early riser. She greeted us warmly and said, "You will be glad to know that Lucy is better. The dear child is still asleep." I looked into her room and saw her, but did not go in, lest I should disturb her. The professor smiled and looked quite jubilant. He rubbed his hands together and said, "Oh, aha! I thought I had diagnosed the case. My treatment is working." To which she answered, You must not take all the credit to yourself, Doctor. Lucy's state this morning is due in part to me." I think that's the mother at that point, so "You must not take all the credit to yourself, Doctor. Lucy's state this morning is due in part to me." How you do mean, madam?" asked the professor. "Well, I was anxious about the dear child in the night and went into her room. She was sleeping soundly, so soundly that even my coming did not wake her. But the room was awfully stuffy. There were a lot of those horrible, strong-smelling flowers about everywhere, and she had actually a bunch of them round her neck. I feared that the heavy odor would be too much for the dear child in her weak state, so I took them all away and opened a bit of the window to let in a little fresh air. You will be pleased with her, I am sure." She moved off into her boudoir, where she usually breakfasted early. As she had spoken, I watched the professor's face, and saw it turn ashen gray. He had been able to retain his self-command whilst the poor lady was present, for he knew her state and how mischievous a shock would be. He actually smiled on her as he held open the door for her to pass into her room, but the instant she had disappeared, he pulled me suddenly and forcibly into the dining room and closed the door. Then, for the first time in my life, I saw Van Helsing break down. He raised his hands over his head in a sort of mute despair, and then beat his palms together in a helpless way. Finally, he sat down on a chair, and putting his hands before his face, began to sob, with loud, dry sobs that seemed to come from the very racking of his heart. Then he raised his arms again, as though appealing to the whole universe. "Gott, Gott, Gott," he said. "What have we done? What has this poor thing done that we are so sore beset? Is there fate amongst us still, sent down from the pagan world of old, that such things must be, and in such way? This poor mother, all unknowing, and all for the best as she think, does she thing as lose her daughter body and soul. And we must not tell her. We must not even warn her, or she die, and then both die. Oh, how we are beset! How are all the powers of the devils against us? Suddenly he jumped to his feet. Come, come, we must see and act, devils or no devils, or all the devils at once. It matters not, we fight him all the same. He went into the hall for his bag, and together we went up to Lucy's room. Once again I drew up the blind, whilst Van Helsing went towards the bed. This time he did not start as he looked on the poor face with the same awful, waxen pallor as before. He wore a look of stern sadness and infinite pity. "As I expected," he murmured, with that hissing inspiration of his which meant so much. Without a word he went and locked the door, and then began to set out, and on the little table the instruments for yet another operation of transfusion of blood. I had long ago recognized the necessity, and begun to take off my coat, but he stopped me with a warning hand. "No," he said. "Today you must operate. I shall provide. You are weakened already." As he spoke, he took off his coat and rolled up his shirt sleeve. Again the operation, again the narcotic, again some return of color to the ashy cheeks, and the regular breathing of healthy sleep. This time I watched whilst Van Helsing recruited himself and rested. Presently he took on an opportunity of telling Mrs. Westenra that she must not remove anything from Lucy's room without consulting him, that the flowers were of medicinal value, and that the breathing of their odor was part of the system of cure. Then he took over the care of the case himself, saying that he would watch this night and the next, and would send me word when to come. After another hour, Lucy waked from her sleep, fresh and bright, and seemingly not much the worse for her terrible ordeal. What does it all mean? I am beginning to wonder if my long habit of life amongst the insane is beginning to tell upon my own brain. Lucy Westenra's diary. 17 September, 4 days and nights of peace. I am getting so strong again that I hardly know myself. It is as if I had passed through some long nightmare and had just awakened to see the beautiful sunshine and feel the fresh air of the morning around me. I have a dim half remembrance of long, anxious times of waiting and fearing. Darkness in which there was not even the pain of hope to make present distress more poignant, and then long spells of oblivion, and the rising back to life as a diver coming up through a great press of water. Since, however, Dr. Van Helsing has been with me, all this bad dreaming seems to have passed away. The noises that used to frighten me out of my wits, the flapping against the windows, the distant voices which seemed so close to me, the harsh sounds that came from I know not where and commanded me to do I know not what, have all ceased. I go to bed now without any fear of sleep. I do not even try to keep awake. I have grown quite fond of the garlic, and a boxful arrives for me every day from Haarlem. Tonight Dr. Van Helsing is going away, as he has to be for a day in Amsterdam. But I need not be watched. I am well enough to be left alone. Thank God for Mother's sake, and dear Arthur's, and for all our friends who have been so kind. I shall not even feel the change, for last night Dr. Van Helsing slept in his chair a lot of the time. I found him asleep twice when I awoke, but I did not fear to go to sleep again, although the boughs or bats or something flapped almost angrily against the window panes. The Pall Mall Gazette, 18 September. The Escaped Wolf. Perilous adventure of our interviewer. Interview with the keeper in the zoological gardens. After many inquiries and almost as many refusals, and perpetually using the words Pall Mall Gazette as a sort of talisman, I managed to find the keeper of the section of the zoological gardens in which the wolf department is included. Thomas Builder lives in one of the cottages in the enclosure behind the elephant house, and was just sitting down to his tea when I found him. Thomas and his wife are hospitable folk, elderly and without children, and if the specimen I enjoyed of their hospitality be of the average kind, their lives must be pretty comfortable. The keeper would not enter on what he called, quote unquote, business until the supper was over, and we were all satisfied. Then, when the table was cleared and he had lit his pipe, he said, "Now, sir, you can go on and arsk me what you want. You'll excuse me refusing to talk of professional subjects afore meals. I gives the wolves and the jackals and the hyenas in all our section their tea afore I begins to arsk them questions." "How do you mean, ask them questions?" I queried, wishful to get him into a talkative humor. "Ittin' of them over the cad with the pole is one way, scratching of their hearts is another. When gents as is flush wants a bit of the show earth to their gals, I don't so much mind the fust. The itins with the pole afore I chucks in their dinner, but I waits till they've 'ad their sherry and coffee to speak afore I tries on with the ear scratching, mind you," he said philosophically. "There's a deal of the same nature in us as in them there animils. Here's yous a comin' and arskin' of me questions about my business, and I that grumpy like that only for your bloomin' quid. I'd a seen you blowed fust 'fore I'd answer. Not even when you arst me sarcastic like if I'd like you to arsk the superintendent if you might arsk me questions. Without offense, did I tell yer to go to hell?" "You did." "And when you said you'd report me, and when you said you'd report me for using of obscene language that was hitting me over the head. But that aft made that all right. I weren't a goin' to fight, so I waited for the food, and did with my owl as the wolves and lions and tigers does. But Lord love your art, now that the old ooman has stuck a chunk of her tea cake in me, and rinsed me out with her bloomin' old teapot, and I've lit a hup. You may scratch my ears for all you're worth, and won't get even a growl out of me. Drive along with your questions. I know what you're comin' at. That 'ere escaped wolf." "Exactly. I want you to give me your view of it. Just tell me how it happened, and when I know the facts, I'll get you to say what you consider was the cause of it, and how you think the whole affair will end."
"All right, Governor. This 'ere is about the old story. That 'ere wolf was what we called Berserker, was one of 3 gray ones that came from Norway to Jamrax, which we bought off him 4 years ago. He was a nice, well-behaved wolf that never gave no trouble to talk of. I'm more surprised at him for wanting to get out, nor any other animal in this place. But there, you can't trust wolves no more nor women."
Seriously, Bram Stoker. Okay. Misogyny aside, let's go.
"Don't you mind him, sir,"
broke the Mrs. Tom, and with a cheery laugh,
"he's got mindin' the animals so long that blessed if he ain't the old wolf hisself. But there ain't no harm in him."
"Well, sir, it was about 2 hours from feeding yesterday when I first heard my disturbance. I was making up
I was making up a litter in the monkey house for the young puma which is ill, but when I heard the yelping and owling, I came away straight. There was a berserker a tearing like a mad thing at the bars if he wanted to get out. There wasn't much people about that day, and close at hand was only one man, a tall, thin chap with a hook nose and a pointed beard with a few white hairs running through it. He had a hard, cold look and red eyes, and I sort of misliked to him, for it seems if he was him as they was irritated at. He had white kid gloves on his hands, and he pointed out the animals to me and said, "Keeper, these wolves seem upset at something." Mind, mind, it's you, says I, for I did not think the airs as he give itself. He didn't get angry as I hoped he would, but he smiled a kind of insolent smile with a mouth full of white sharp teeth. "Oh no, they wouldn't like me," he says. "Oh yes, they would," says I, imitating of him. "They always like a bone or two to clean their teeth on about tea time, which you as a bagful." Well, it was an odd thing, but when them animals see us a talking, they lay down. And when I went over to Berserker, he let me stroke his ears, same as ever. That there man came over and blessed, but if he didn't put his hand and stroke the old wolf ears too. "Take care," says I. "Berserker is quick." "Never mind," he says. "I'm used to him." Are you in the business yourself?" I says, taking off my hat for a man what trades in wolves, and Senator is a good friend to keepers. "No," says he, "not exactly in the business, but I have made pets of several." And with that he lifts his out of perlite as a he lifts his hat as perlite as the Lord and walks away. Old Berserker kept looking after him till he was out of sight, and then went and lay down in the corner and wouldn't come out the whole evening. Well, last night, so soon as the moon was up, the wolves here all began a howling. There weren't nothing for them to howl at. There weren't no one near except some one that was evidently a calling a dog somewheres out back of the gardens in the park road. Once or twice I went out to see that all was right, and it was, and then the howling stopped. Just before 12 o'clock. I just took a look round afore turning in, bust me. But when I came opposite to old Berserker's cage, I see the rails broken and twisted about the cage empty, and that's all I know for certain.
Did anyone else see anything?
One of our gardeners was coming about that time from an armory, when he sees a big gray dog coming out through the gardening edges. At least so he says, but I don't give much for it myself. For if he did, he never said a word about it to his missus when he got home. And it was only after the escape of the wolf was made known, and he had been up all night a hunting of the park for Berserker, that he remembered seeing anything. My own belief was that the armory had got him in his head.
Now, Mr. Builder, can you account in any way for the escape of the wolf?
"Well, sir,"
he said with a suspicious sort of modesty.
"I think I can, but I don't know in how you'd be satisfied with the theory."
Certainly I shall, if a man like you who knows the animals from experience can't hazard a good guess at any rate, who is even to try?
"Well then, sir, I accounts for it this way. It seems to me that there wolf escaped, simply because he wanted to get out."
From the hearty way that both Thomas and his wife laughed at the joke, I could see that it had done service before, and at that the whole explanation was simply an elaborate sell. I couldn't cope in bandage with the worthy Thomas, but I thought I knew a surer way to his heart, so I said, "Now, Mr. Builder, we'll consider that first half-sovereign's worked off, and this brother of his is waiting to be claimed when you've told me what you think will happen."
"Right you are, sir," he said briskly. "You'll excuse me, I know for a chaffing of ye, but the old woman here winked at me, which is as much as telling me to go on." Well, I never, said the old lady. My opinion is this. That there wolf is a hiding of somewheres. The gardener what didn't remember was said he was a galloping northward faster than a horse could go, but I don't believe him. For you see, sir, wolves don't gallop no more nor dogs does. They not being built that way. Wolves is fine things in a storybook, and I dare say that they gets in packs and does be chivying something that's a more feared than they is, than they can make a devil of a noise and chop it up, whatever it is. But Lord bless you, in real life a wolf is only a low creature, not half so clever or bold as a good dog, and not half a quarter so much fighting in him. This one ain't been used to fightin' or even to providin' for hisself, and more like he's somewhere round the park a hidin', a shiverin' of, and if he thinks at all, wonderin' where he is to get his breakfast from. Or maybe he's got down some area and is in a coal cellar. My eye won't some cook get a rum start when he sees his green eyes a shinin' at her out of the dark. If if he can't get food, he's bound to look for it, and mayhap he may chance to light on a butcher's shop in time. If he doesn't, and some nursemaid goes a walking orf with a soldier, leaving of the infant perambulator, in the perambulator, well, then I shouldn't be surprised if the census is one baby the less. That's all.
I was handing him the half sovereign when something came bobbing up against the window, and Mr. Builder's face doubled its natural length with surprise.
God bless me, he said, if there ain't old Berserker come back by hisself.
He went to the door and opened it. A most unnecessary proceeding, it seemed to me. I have always thought that a wild animal never looks so well as when some obstacle of pronounced durability is between us. A personal experience has intensified rather than diminished that idea. After all, however, there is nothing like custom, for neither Builder nor his wife thought any more of the wolf than I should of a dog. The animal itself was peaceful and well behaved as the animal itself was as peaceful and well behaved as that father of all picture wolves, Red Riding Hood's quondam friend, whilst moving her confidence to masquerade. The whole scene was an unutterable mixture of comedy and pathos. The wicked wolf that for a day and a half had paralyzed London and set all the children in the town shivering in their shoes was there in a sort of penchant mood, and was received and petted like a sort of vulpine prodigal son. Old Builder examined him all over with most tender solitude, and when he had finished with his penitence, said,
There, I knew the poor old chap would get into some kind of trouble. Didn't I say it all along? Here's his head all cut and full of broken glass. He's been a getting over some bloomin' wall or other. It's a shame that people are allowed to top their walls with broken bottles. This here's what comes of it. Come along, Berserker.
He took the wolf and locked him up in a cage, with a piece of meat that satisfied, in quantity at any rate, the elementary conditions of the fatted calf, and went off to report. I came off too to report the only inclusive information that is given today regarding the strange escapade at the zoo. Dr. Seward's Diary. 17 September. I was engaged after dinner in my study, posting up my books, which through press of other work and the many visits to Lucy had fallen sadly into arrear. Suddenly the door was burst open, and in rushed my patient, with his face distorted with passion. I was thunderstruck, for such a thing as a patient getting of his own accord into the superintendent's study is almost unknown. Without an instant's pause, he made straight at me. He had a dinner knife in his hand, and as I saw he was dangerous, I tried to keep the table between us.
He was too quick and too strong for me, however, for before I could get my balance, he had struck at me and cut my left wrist rather severely. Before he could strike again, however, I got in my right, and he was sprawling on his back on the floor. My wrist bled freely, and quite a little pool trickled on the carpet. I saw that my friend was not intent on further effort, and occupied myself binding up my wrist, keeping a wary eye on the prostrate figure all the time. When the attendants rushed in and we turned our attention to him, his employment positively sickened me. He was lying on his belly on the floor, licking up like a dog the blood which had fallen from my wounded wrist. He was easily secured, and to my surprise went with the attendants quite placidly, simply repeating over and over again,
"The blood is life! The blood is life!"
I cannot afford to lose blood just at present. I have lost too much of late for my physical good, and then the prolonged strain of Lucy's illness and its horrible phases is telling on me. I am overexcited and weary, and I need rest. 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 Happily, Van Helsing has not summoned me, so I need not forego my sleep. Tonight I could not well do without it. Telegram, Van Helsing, Antwerp to Seward, Carfax. Sent to Carfax, Sussex, as no county given. Delivered late by 22 hours. 17th September. Do not fail to be at Hillingham tonight. If not watching all the time frequently, visit and see that flowers are as placed. Very important. Do not fail. Shall be with you as soon as possible after arrival. Dr. Seward's diary, 18 September. Just off for train to London. The arrival of Van Helsing's telegram filled me with dismay. A whole night lost, and I know by bitter experience that what may happen in a night. Of course, it is possible that all may be well, but what may have happened? Surely there is some horrible doom hanging over us, that every possible accident should thwart us in all we try to do. I shall take the cylinder with me, and then I can complete my entry on Lucy's phonograph. Memorandum left by Lucy Westenra, 17 September, night. I write this and leave it to be seen, so that no one may by any chance get into trouble through me. This is an exact record of what took place tonight. I feel I am dying of weakness and have barely strength to write, but it must be done if I die in the doing. I went to bed as usual, taking care that the flowers were placed as Dr. Van Helsing directed, and soon fell asleep. I was waked by the flapping at the window, which had begun after the sleepwalking on the cliff at Whitby, when Mina saved me, and which now I know so well. I was not afraid, but I did wish that Dr. Seward was in the next room, as Dr. Van Helsing... Oh, another spelling error. As Dr. Van Helsing said he would, so that I might have called him. I tried to go to sleep, but could not. Then there came to me the old fear of sleep, and I determined to keep awake. Perversely, sleep would try to come then, when I did not want it, so, as I feared to be alone, I opened my door and called out, "Is there anybody there?" There was no answer. I was afraid to wake Mother, and so closed my door again. Then, outside in the shrubbery, I heard a sort of howl like a dog's, but more fierce and deeper. I went to the window and looked out, but could see nothing, except a big bat, which had evidently been buffeting its wings against the window. So I went back to bed again, but determined not to go to sleep. Presently the door opened, and Mother looked in, seeing by my moving that I was not asleep, came in and sat by me. She said to me even more sweetly and softly than her wont,
I was un I was uneasy about you, darling, and came in to see that you were all right. I feared that she might catch cold sitting there, and asked her to come in and sleep with me, so she came into bed and lay down beside me. She did not take off her dressing gown, for she said she would only stay a while and then go back to her own bed. As she lay there in my arms and I in hers, the flapping and buffeting came to the window again. She was startled and a little frightened, and cried out, "What is that?" I tried to pacify her, and at last succeeded, and she lay quiet. But I could hear her poor dear heart still beating terribly. After a while, there was the low howl again out in the shrubbery, and shortly after there was a crash at the window, and a lot of broken glass was hurled on the floor. The window blind blew back with the wind that rushed in, and in the aperture of the broken panes there was the head of a great gaunt gray wolf. Mother cried out in a fright and struggled up into a sitting posture, and clutched wildly at anything that would help her. Amongst other things, she clutched the wreath of flowers that Dr. Van Helsing insisted on my wearing round my neck, and she tore it away from me. For a second or two she sat up, pointing at the wolf, and there was a strange and horrible gurgling in her throat. Then she fell over, as if struck with lightning, and her head hit my forearm and made me dizzy for a moment. The room and all around seemed to spin round. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, but the wolf drew his head back, and a whole myriad of little specks seemed to come blowing in through the broken window, and wheeling and circling round like the pillar of dust that travelers describe when there is a simoon in the desert. I tried to stir, but there was some spell upon me and dear mother's poor body which seemed to grow cold already, for her dear heart had ceased to beat, weighed me down, and I remembered no more for a while. The time did not seem long, but very, very awful, till I recovered consciousness again. Somewhere near a passing bell was tolling. The dogs all round the neighborhood were howling, and in our shrubbery, seemingly just outside, a nightingale was singing. I was dazed and stupid with pain and terror and weakness. But the sound of the nightingale seemed like the voice of my dead mother, come back to comfort me. The sound seemed to have awakened the maids too, for I could hear their bare feet pattering outside my door. I called to them, and they came in, and when they saw what had happened and what it was that lay over me on the bed, they screamed out. The wind rushed in through the broken window, and the door slammed to. They lifted off the body of my dear mother and laid her, covered up with a sheet, on the bed after I had got up. They were all so frightened and nervous that I directed them to go to the dining room and have each a glass of wine. The door flew open for an instant and closed again. The maids shrieked and then went in a body to the dining room, and I laid with flowers I had on my dear mother's breast. And I laid what flowers I had on my dear mother's breast. When they were there, I remembered what Dr. Van Helsing had told me, but I didn't like to remove them, and besides, I would have some of the servants to sit up with me now. I was surprised that the maids did not come back. I called them, but got no answer. So I went to the dining room to look for them. My heart sank when I saw what had happened. They all four lay helpless on the floor, breathing heavily. The decanter of sherry was on the table, half full, but there was a queer, acrid smell about. I was suspicious and examined the decanter. It smelt of laudanum, and looking on the sideboard, I found that the bottle which mother's doctor uses for her, did use, was empty. What am I to do? What am I to do? I am back in the room with mother. I cannot leave her, and I am alone, save for the sleeping servants, whom someone has drugged. Alone with the dead. I dare not go out, for I can hear the low howl of the wolf through the broken window. The air seems full of specks, floating and circling in the draught from the window, and the lights burn blue and dim. What am I to do? God shield me from harm this night. I shall hide this paper in my breast, where they shall find it when they come to lay me out. My dear mother, gone. It is time that I go too. Goodbye, dear Arthur. If I should not survive this night, God keep you, dear, and God help me. Intense. It's getting wild up in here. Dr. Van Helsing, my goodness. You did your best, but Mother died anyway. And that wolf, that poor wolf, at the behest of Dracula, smashing its head through the window. Well, he hasn't had a meal in a few days, which I find surprising. I would have figured he would have found other food sources, you know? Well, this is between chapter break time, so my plan is to stay hydrated, obviously. So we're gonna shoot for 3 hours today. I'm feeling pretty good, and I've noticed these longer streams are getting easier. So maybe someday I can be a real streamer and actually go like 5 or 6 hours like a champ. No, probably not. I'll probably just enjoy the 4 hours. That's what I'm going to shoot for eventually, is 4 hours. Well, thank you. We're getting there for the numbers. By the way, I added a couple of things. So I have little alert notifications. So if somebody joins, I have this cute little ghost alert. If I have a new follower, it'll be this cool little ghost that shows up. And then for my follower goal, I have that a little alert up at the top there. You can see it, the orange block. Just like, help me reach affiliate, please, and thank you. So tell your friends, tell your wives, tell your children's. Well, probably not your children. This isn't really appropriate content for children. But we're getting to some dark times. The situation with Lucy and the situation in her house. I mean, all of her servants are drunk on opiate filled sherry, and she's alone with her dead mother. This is not a good situation at all. But I am going to take a quick break and drink some water. So I suggest all of you do the same. Stretch if you need to. Take a little walkabout. After chapter 12, I'll probably take 5, use the restroom, do the thing. You know, the things we don't talk about. Blah, blah, blah. I also feel that the outro doesn't get enough, what's the word I'm looking for? I feel like the outro doesn't get to be heard as often because it's kind of the end of my stream. So I think on my Be Right Back section, I'm going to add that as a source. So that way, like when instead of the intro, it's going to be the outro for the Be Right Back, because I really want to show off the Weary Pines audios. I love them. I think they're fun. They're like appropriate. So they've been really nice to have as far as a little bit of piece of something, you know. That's an interesting emoji. Okay. We are now on to chapter 12 of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Chapter 12, Dr. Seward's Diary. 18 September, I drove at once to Hillingham and arrived early. Keeping my cab at the gate, I went up the avenue alone. I knocked gently and rang as quietly as possible, for I feared to disturb Lucy or her mother, and hoped to only bring a servant to the door. After a while, finding no response, I knocked and rang again. Still no answer. I cursed the laziness of the servants, that they should lie abed at such an hour, for it was now 10 o'clock, and so rang and knocked again, but more impatiently, but still without response. Hitherto I had blamed only the servants, but now a terrible fear began to assail me. Was this desolation but another link in the chain of doom, which seemed drawing tight around us? Was it indeed a house of death of which I had come too late? I knew that minutes, even seconds of delay might mean hours of danger to Lucy. If she had had again one of those frightful relapses, and if I went round the house to try if I could find by chance an entry anywhere, I could find no means of ingress. I could find no means of ingress. Every window and door was fastened and locked, and I returned baffled to the porch. As I did so, I heard the rapid pit-pat of a swiftly driven horse's feet. They stopped at the gate, and a few seconds later I met Van Helsing running up the avenue. When he saw me, he gasped.
Then it is you, and you just arrived? How is she? Are we too late? Did you not get my telegram?
I answered as quickly and coherently as I could that I had only got his telegram early in the morning and had not lost a minute in coming here, and that I could not make any one in the house hear me. He paused and raised his hat, and as he said solemnly,
Then I fear we are too late. God's will be done.
with his usual recuperative energy, he went on,
Come, if there be no way open to get in, we must make one. Time is all is us now. Time is all in all to us now.
We went round to the back of the house, where there was a kitchen window. The professor took a small surgical saw from his case, and handing it to me, pointed to the iron bars which guarded the window. I attacked them at once, and had very soon cut through 3 of them. Then, with a long, thin knife, we pushed back the fastening of the sashes, and opened the window. I helped the professor in and followed him. There was no one in the kitchen or in the servants' rooms, which were close at hand. We tried all the rooms as we went along, and in the dining room, dimly lit by rays of light through the shutters, found 4 servant women lying on the floor. There was no need to think them dead, for their stertorous breathing and the acrid smell of laudanum in the room left no doubt as to their condition. Van Helsing and I looked at each other, and as we moved away, he said,
We can attend to them later.
Then we ascended to Lucy's room. For an instant or two we paused at the door to listen, but there was no sounds that we could hear. With white faces and trembling hands, we opened the door gently and entered the room. How shall I describe what we saw? On the bed lay 2 women, Lucy and her mother. The latter lay farthest in, and she was covered with a white sheet, the edge of which had been blown back by the draught through the broken window, showing the drawn, white face, with a look of terror fixed upon it. By her side lay Lucy, with face white and still more drawn. The flowers which had been round her neck we found upon her mother's bosom, and her throat was bare, showing the 2 little wounds which we had noticed before, but looking horribly white and mangled. Without a word the professor bent over the bed, his head almost touching poor Lucy's breast. Then he gave a quick turn of his head,
as of one who listens, and leaping to his feet, he cried out to me, "It is not yet too late! Quick, quick, bring the brandy!" I flew downstairs and returned with it, taking care to smell and taste it, lest it too were drugged like the decanter of sherry which I found on the shelf. The maids were still breathing, but more restlessly, and I fancied that the narcotic was wearing off. I did not stay to make sure, but returned to Van Helsing. He rubbed the brandy as one as on one as on another occasion, on her lips and gums and on her wrists and the palms of her hands. He said to me, "I can do this. All that can be at the present. You go wake those maids, flick them in the face with a wet towel and flick them hard. Make them get heat and fire and a warm bath. This poor soul is nearly as cold as that beside her. She will need be heated before we can do anything more." I went at once and found little difficulty in waking 3 of the women. The 4th was only a little girl, and the drug had evidently affected her more strongly, so I lifted her on the sofa and let her sleep. The others were a little dazed at first, but as remembrance came back to them, they cried and sobbed in a hysterical manner. I was stern with them, however, and would not let them talk. I told them that one life was bad enough to lose, and that if they delayed, they would sacrifice Miss Lucy. So, sobbing and crying, they went about their way half-clad as they were, and prepared fire and water. Fortunately, the kitchen and the boiler fires was still alive, and there was no lack of hot water. We got a bath and carried Lucy out as she was, and placed her in it. Whilst we were busy chafing her limbs, there was a knock at the hall door. One of the maids ran off, hurried on some more clothes, and opened it. Then she returned and whispered to us that there was a gentleman who had come with a message from Mr. Holmwood. I bade her simply tell him that he must wait, for we could see no one now. She went away with the message, and engrossed with our work, I clean forgot all about him. I never saw in all my experience the professor work in such deadly earnest. I knew, as he knew, that it was a stand-up fight with death, and in a pause told him so. He answered me in a way that I did not understand, but with the sternest look that his face could wear. If that were all, I would stop here where we are now, and let her fade away into peace, for I see no life over the horizon." He went on with his work, with, if possible, renewed and more frenzied vigor. Huh, that's weird. 161. Okay, 1 second. I'm going to refresh the page here. Ta-da! Presently, we both began to be conscious that the heat was beginning to be of some effect. Lucy's heart beat a trifle more audibly to the stethoscope, and her lungs had a perceptible movement. Van Helsing's face almost beamed as he lifted her from the bath and rolled her in a hot sheet to dry her. He said to me, "The first gain is ours. Check to the king." He took Lucy into another room which had by now been prepared, and laid her in bed, and forced a few drops of brandy down her throat. I noticed that Van Helsing tied a soft silk handkerchief round her throat. She was still unconscious, and was quite as bad, if not worse than we had ever seen her. Van Helsing called in one of the women and told her to stay with her and not to take her eyes off her till we returned, and then beckoned me out of the room. "We must consult as to what is to be done," he said as we descended the stairs. In the hall he opened the dining room door, and we passed in.
he closing the door carefully behind him. The shutters had been opened, but the blinds were already down. With the obedience to the etiquette of death, which the British woman of the lower classes always rigidly observes, the room was therefore dimly dark. It was, however, light enough for our purposes. Van Helsing's sternness was somewhat relieved by a look of perplexity. He was evidently torturing his mind about something, so I waited for an instant, and he spoke. "What are we to do now? Where are we to turn for help? We must have another transfusion of blood, and that soon, or that poor girl's life won't be worth an hour's purchase. You are exhausted already. I am exhausted too. I fear to trust these women, even if they would have courage to submit. What are we to do for someone who will open his veins for her?" What's the matter with me, anyhow? Oh, let's see. Quincy Morris. Oh, it's Quincy. All right, here we go. What's the matter with me, anyhow? The voice came from the sofa across the room, and its tones brought relief and joy to my heart, for they were those of Quincy Morris. Van Helsing started angrily at the first sound, but his face softened, and a glad look came into his eyes as he cried out, "Quincy Morris!" and rushed towards him with outstretched hands. "What has brought you here?" No. "What has brought you here?" I cried as our hands met. "I guess art is the cause." And he handed me a telegram. "Have not heard from Seward for 3 days, and am terribly anxious. Cannot leave. Father still is same condition. Send me word how Lucy is. Do not delay. Holmwood." "I think I came just in the nick of time. You know you have only to tell me what to do." Van Helsing strode forward and took his hand, looking him straight in the eyes, and he said, "A brave man's blood is the best thing in the world when a woman is in trouble. You're a man and no mistake. Well, the devil may work against us for all he's worth, but God sends us men when we want them." Once again we went through that ghastly operation. I have not the heart to go through with the details. Lucy had got a terrible shock, and it told on her more than before. For though plenty of blood went into her veins, her body did not respond to the treatment as well as on the other occasions. Her struggle back into life was something frightful to see and hear. However, the action of both heart and lungs improved, and Van Helsing made a subcutaneous injection of morphia as before, and with good effect. Her faint became a profound slumber. The professor watched whilst I went downstairs with Quincy Morris, and sent one of the maids to pay off one of the cabmen who were waiting. I left Quincy lying down after having a glass of wine, and took the cook to get ready a good breakfast. Then a thought struck me, and I went into the room where Lucy now was. When I came softly in, I found Van Helsing with a sheet or two of notepaper in his hand. He had evidently read it, and was thinking it over as he sat with his hand to his brow. There was a look of grim satisfaction in his face, as of one who has had a doubt solved. He handed me the paper, saying only, "It dropped from Lucy's breast when we carried her to the bath." When I had read it, I stood looking at the professor. After a pause, asked him, "In God's name, what does it all mean? Was she, or is she, mad? Or what sort of horrible danger is it?" I was so bewildered that I did not know what to say more. Van Helsing put out his hand and took the paper, saying, "Do not trouble about it now. Forget it. Do not trouble about it now. Forget it for the present. You shall know and understand it all in good time. But it will be later. And now what it is that you came to me to say." This brought me back to fact, and I was all myself again. I came to speak about the certificate of death. If we do not act properly and wisely, there may be an inquest, and that paper would have to be produced. I am in hopes that we need have no inquest, for if we had it, would surely kill poor Lucy, if nothing else. If nothing else did. I know, and you know, and the other doctor who attended her knows that Mrs. Westenra had a disease of the heart, and we can certify that she died of it. Let us fill up the certificate at once, and I shall take it myself to the registrar and go on to the undertaker.
Good, my friend John. Good. Oh, my friend John, well thought of. Truly, Miss Lucy, if she be sad in the foes that beset her, is at least happy in the friends that love her. 1, 2, 3, all open their veins for her, besides one old man. Ah, yes, I know, friend John, I am not blind. I love you all the more for it. Now go.
In the hall, I met Quincy Morris with a telegram for Arthur, telling him that Mrs. Westenra was dead, and that Lucy also had been ill, but was now going on better. That Van Helsing and I were with her. I told him where I was going, and he hurried out, but as I was going, said,
When you come back, Jack, we may have 2 words with you all to ourselves.
I nodded in reply and went out. I found no difficulty about the registration and arranged with the local undertaker to come up in the evening to measure for the coffin and to make arrangements. When I got back, Quincy was waiting for me. I told him I would see him as soon as I knew about Lucy, and went up to her room. She was still sleeping, and the professor seemingly had not moved from his seat at her side. From his putting his finger to his lips, I gathered that he expected her to wake before long and was afraid of forestalling nature. So I went down to Quincy and took him into the breakfast room, where the blinds were not drawn down, and which was a little more cheerful, or rather less cheerless, than the other rooms. When we were alone, he said to me,
Jack Stewart, I don't want to shove myself in anywhere where I've no right to be, but this is no ordinary case. You know I love that girl and wanted to marry her, but although that's all past and gone, I can't help feeling anxious about her all the same. What is it that's wrong with her? The Dutchman, and a fine old fellow that he is, I can see that, said time you two came that time you two came into the room that you must have another transfusion of blood, and that both you and he were exhausted. Now I know well that you medical men speak in camera, and that a man must not expect to know what they consult about in private, but this is no common matter, and whatever it is, I have done my part. Is that not so?
"That is so," I said, and he went on,
I take it that both you and Van Helsing had done already what I did today. Is that not so?
"That is so."
And I guess Art was in it too. When I saw him 4 days ago down at his own place, he looked queer. I've not seen anything pulled down so quick since I was on the pampas and had a mare that I was fond of go to grass all in a night. One of those big bats that they call vampires had got at her in the night, and what with his gorge and the vein left open, there wasn't enough blood in her to let her stand up, and if I had to pull a bullet through her as she lay, and I had to put a bullet through her as she lay. Jack, if you may tell me without betraying confidence, Arthur was the first. Is that not so?
As he spoke, the poor fellow looked terribly anxious. He was in the torture of suspense regarding the woman he loved, and his utter ignorance of the terrible mystery which seemed to surround her intensified his pain. His very heart was bleeding, and it took all the manhood of him, and there was a royal lot of it too. To keep him from breaking down, I paused before answering, for I felt that I must not betray anything which the professor wished kept secret. But already he knew so much and guessed so much that there could be no reason for not answering. So I answered in the same phrase, That is so. That's so.
And how long has this been going on?
About 10 days.
10 days? Then I guess Jack Seward, that poor pretty creature that we all love has had put into her veins within that time the blood of 4 strong men. Man alive, her whole body wouldn't hold it.
Then, coming close to me, he spoke in the fierce half whisper.
What took it out?
I shook my head. That, I said, is the crux. Van Helsing is simply frantic about it, and I'm at my wit's end. I can't even hazard a guess. There has been a series of little circumstances which have thrown out all of our calculations as to Lucy being properly watched. But these shall not occur again. I'm going to pause. Why did you keep her in that house? It blows my mind. They were not thinking. It would have been much more interesting, and they would have discovered much sooner that something was awry if they had moved her somewhere else, a different house, anywhere else at all. Okay. There has been a series of little circumstances which have thrown out all our calculations as to Lucy being properly watched. But these shall not occur again. Here we stay until all be well or ill. Quincy held out his hand.
Count me in, he said. He said, You and the Dutchman will tell me what to do, and I'll do it.
When she woke late in the afternoon, Lucy's first movement was to feel her breast, and to my surprise produced the paper which Van Helsing had given me to read. The careful professor had replaced it where it had come from, lest on waking she should be alarmed. Her eye then lit on Van Helsing and on me too, and gladdened. Then she looked around the room, and seeing where she was, shuddered. She gave a loud cry and put her poor thin hands before her pale face. We both understood what that meant, that she had realized to the full her mother's death. So we tried what we could to comfort her. Doubtless sympathy eased her somewhat, but she was very low in thought and spirit, and wept silently and weakly for a long time. We told her that either or both of us would now remain with her all the time, and that seemed to comfort her. Towards dusk she fell into a doze. Here a very odd thing occurred. Whilst still asleep, she took the paper from her breast and tore it in two. Van Helsing stepped over and took the pieces from her. All the same, however, she went on with the action of tearing, as though the material were still in her hands. Finally, she lifted her hands and opened them, as though scattering the fragments. Van Helsing seemed surprised, and his brows gathered as if in thought, but he said nothing. 19 September. All last night she slept fitfully, being always afraid to sleep, and something weaker when she woke from it. The professor and I took it in turns to watch, and we never left her for a moment unattended. Quincy Morris said nothing about his intention, but I knew that all night long he patrolled round and round the house. When the day came, its searching light showed the ravages in poor Lucy's strength. She was hardly able to turn her head, and the little nourishment which she could take seemed to do her no good. At times she slept, and both Van Helsing and I noticed the difference in her. Between sleeping and waking, whilst asleep, she looked stronger, although more haggard, and her breathing was softer, her open mouth showed the pale gums drawn back from the teeth, which thus looked positively longer and sharper than usual. When she woke, the softness of her eyes evidently changed the expression, for she looked her own self, although a dying one. In the afternoon she asked for Arthur, and we telegraphed for him. Quincy went off to meet him at the station. When he arrived, it was nearly 6 o'clock, and the sun was setting full and warm, and the red light streamed in through the window and gave more color to the pale cheeks. When he saw her, Arthur was simply choking with emotion, and none of us could speak. In the hours that passed, the fits of sleep or the comatose condition that passed for it had grown more frequent, so that the pauses when conversation was possible were shortened. Arthur's presence, however, seemed to act as a stimulant. She rallied a little and spoke to him more brightly than she had done since we arrived. He too pulled himself together and spoke as cheerily as he could, so that the best was made of everything. It was now nearly 1 o'clock, and he and Van Helsing were sitting with her. I am to relieve them in a quarter of an hour, and I am entering this on Lucy's phonograph. Until 6 o'clock, they are to try to rest. I fear that tomorrow will end our watching, for the shock has been too great. The poor child cannot rally. God help us all. Letter, Mina Harker to Lucy Westenra, unopened by her. 17 September. Dearest Lucy, it seems an age since I heard from you, or indeed since I wrote. You will pardon me, I know for all I know for all my faults, when you have read all my budget of news. Well, I got my husband back all right. When we arrived at Exeter, there was a carriage waiting for us, and in it, though he had an attack of gout, Mr. Hawkins. He took us to his house, where there were rooms for us all, nice and comfortable. And we dined together. After dinner, Mr. Hawkins said, "My dears, I want to drink your health and prosperity, and may every blessing attend you both. I know you both from children, and have with love and pride seen you grow up. Now I want you to make your home here with me. I have left to me neither chick nor child, all are gone, and in my will I have left you everything." I cried. Lucy, dear, as Jonathan and the old man clasped hands, our evening was a very, very happy one. So here we are, installed in this beautiful old house, and from both my bedroom and drawing room I can see the great elms of the cathedral close, with their great black stems standing out against the old yellow stone of the cathedral, and I can hear the rooks overhead cawing and chattering and gossiping all day. After the manner of rooks and humans, I am busy. I need not tell you, arranging things and housekeeping. Jonathan and Mr. Hawkins are busy all day. For now that Jonathan is a partner, Mr. Hawkins wants to tell him all about the clients. How is your dear mother getting on? I wish I could run up to town for a day or two to see you, dear. But I dare not go yet, with so much on my shoulders, and Jonathan wants looking after still. He's beginning to put some flesh on his bones again, but he was terribly weakened by the long illness. Even now, he sometimes starts out of his sleep in a sudden way and wakes all trembling until I can coax him back to his usual placidity. However, thank God these occasions grow less frequent as the days go on, and they will in time pass away altogether. I trust. Timing on that. However, thank God, these occasions grow less frequent as the days go on, and and they will in time pass away altogether, I trust. And now I have told you my news. Let me ask yours. When are you to be married, and where, and who is to perform the ceremony? And what are you to wear, and is it to be a public or private wedding? Tell me all about it, dear. Tell me all about everything, for there is nothing which interests you which will not be dear to me. Jonathan asked me to send Jonathan asked me to send his respectful duty, but I do not think that is good enough from the junior partner of the important firm Hawkins and Harker. And so, as you love me and he loves me, I love you with all the moods and tenses of the verb. I send you simply his love instead. Goodbye, my dearest Lucy, and all blessings on you. Yours, Mina Harker. Report from Patrick Hennessy, MD, MRC, LSLK, QCPI, etc., to John Seward, MD. That is a lot of letters at the end of this man's name. So doctor, and I don't know what any of the rest of them. I think they're just random letters, honestly. I'll have to look it up later. 20 September. My dear sir, in accordance with your wishes, I enclose a report of the conditions of everything left in my charge. With regard to patient Renfield, there is more to say. He has had another outbreak, which might have had a dreadful ending, but which, as it fortunately happened, was unattended with any unhappy results. This afternoon, a carrier's cart with 2 men made a call at the empty house, whose grounds abut on ours. The house to which you will remember, the patient twice ran away. The men stopped at our gate to ask the porter their way, as they were strangers. I was myself looking out of the study window, having a smoke after dinner, and saw one of them come up to the house. As he passed the window of Renfield's room, the patient began to rate him from within, and called him all the foul names he could lay his tongue to. The man, who seemed a decent fellow enough, contented himself by telling him to shut up for a foul-mouthed beggar. shut up for a foul-mouthed beggar. Whereon our man accused him of robbing him and wanting to murder him, and said that he would hinder him if he were to swing for it. I opened the window and signed to the man not to notice. So he contented himself for looking the place over and making up his mind as to what kind of place he had got to by saying, "Lord bless yer, sir, I wouldn't mind what was said to me in the bloomin' madhouse. I pity ye and the governor for having to live in the house with a wild beast like that." Then he asked his way civilly enough, and I told him where the gate of the empty house was. He went away, followed by threats and curses and revilings from our man. I went down to see if I could make out any cause for his anger, since he is usually such a well-behaved man, and except his violent fits, nothing of the kind had ever occurred. I found him, to my astonishment, quite composed and most genial in his manner. I tried to get him to talk of the incident, but he blandly asked me questions as to what I meant, and led me to believe that he was completely oblivious of the affair. It was, I am sorry to say, however, only another instance of his cunning, for within half an hour I heard of him again. This time he had broken through the window of his room and was running down the avenue. I called to the attendants to follow me and ran after him, for I feared he was intent on some mischief. My fear was justified when I saw the same cart which had passed before coming down the road, having on it some great wooden boxes. The men were wiping their foreheads, and were flushed in the face, as if with violent exercise. Before I could get up to him, and the patient rushed at them, and pulling one of them off the cart, began to knock his head against the ground. If I had not seized him just at that moment, I believe he would have killed the man there and then. The other fellow jumped down and struck him over the head with the butt end of his heavy whip. It was a terrible blow, but he did not seem to mind it, but seized him also, and struggled with the three of us. Struggled, but he did not seem to mind it. Okay. But he did not seem to mind it, but seized him also, and struggled with the three of us, pulling us to and fro as if we were kittens. You know I am no lightweight, and the others were both burly men. At first he was silent in his fighting, but as we began to master him and the attendants were putting a straight waistcoat on him, he began to shout, "I'll frustrate them!"
I'll frustrate them. They shan't rob me. They shan't murder me by inches. I'll fight for my lord and master.
And all sorts of similar incoherent ravings. It was with very considerable difficulty that they got him back to the house and put him in the padded room. One of the attendants, Hardy, had a broken finger. However, I set it all right, and he is going on well. The two carriers were at first loud in their threats of actions for damages, and promised to rain all the penalties of the law on us. Their threats were, however, mingled with some sort of indirect apology for the defeat of the two of them by a feeble madman. Feeble madman. Renfield, feeble. Okay. They said that if it had not been for the way their strength had been spent in carrying and raising the heavy boxes to the cart, they would have made short work of him. They gave, as another reason for their defeat, the extraordinary state of drouth to which they had been reduced by the dusty nature of their occupation, and the reprehensible distance from the scene of their labors of any place of public entertainment. I quite understood their drift, and after a stiff glass of grog, or rather more of the same, and with each sovereign in hand, they made light of the attack, and swore that they would encounter a worse madman any day for the pleasure of meeting so bloomin' good a bloke. As your correspondent. I took their names and addresses in case they might be needed. They are as follows: Jack Smollett of Dudding's Rents, King George's Road; Great Walworth and Thomas Snelling, Peter Farley's Row, Guide Court, Bethnal Green. They are both in the employment of Harris and Sons Moving and Shipping Company, Orange Masters Yard, Soho. I shall report to you any matter of interest occurring here, and shall wire you at once if there is anything of importance. Believe me, dear sir, yours faithfully, Patrick Hennessy. Second, hydrate. Letter, Mina Harker to Lucy Restonraw, unopened by her. 18 September. My dearest Lucy, such a sad blow has befallen us. Mr. Hawkins has died very suddenly. Some may not think it so sad for us, but we had both come to so love him that it really seems as though we had lost a father. I never knew either father or mother, so that the dear old man's death is a real blow to me. Jonathan is greatly distressed. It is not only that he feels sorrow, deep sorrow, for the dear good man who has befriended him all his life, and now at the end has treated him like his own son and left him a fortune which to people of our modest bringing up is wealth beyond the dream of avarice. But Jonathan feels it on another account. He says the amount of responsibility which it puts upon him makes him nervous. He begins to doubt himself. I try to cheer him up, and my belief in him helps him to have a belief in himself. But it is here that the grave shock that he experienced tells upon him the most. Oh, it is too hard that a sweet, simple, noble, strong nature such as his, a nature which enabled him, by our dear good friend's aid, to rise from clerk to master in a few years, should be so injured that the very essence of its strength is gone. Forgive me, dear, if I worry you with my troubles in the midst of your own happiness, but Lucy, dear. Oh, that's where I said that. Okay. But Lucy, dear, I must tell someone, for the strain of keeping up a brave and cheerful appearance to Jonathan tries me. And I have no one here that I can confide in. I dread coming up to London, as we must do the day after tomorrow. For poor Mr. Hawkins left in his will that he was to be buried in the grave with his father, as there are no relations at all. As there are no relations at all, Jonathan will have to be chief. Jo- okay. As there are no relations at all, Jonathan will have to be chief mourner. I shall try to run over to see you, dearest, if only for a few minutes. Forgive me for troubling you. With all blessings, your loving Mina Harker. If Mina only knew. Dr. Seward's Diary. 20 September. Only resolution and habit can let me make an entry tonight. I am too miserable, too low-spirited, too sick of the world and all in it, including life itself, that I would not care if I heard this moment the flapping of the wings of the angel of death. And he has been flapping those grim wings to some purpose of late. Lucy's mother and Arthur's father, and now let me get on with my work. I duly relieved Van Helsing in his watch over Lucy. We wanted Arthur to go to rest also, but he refused at first. It was only when I told him that we should want him to help us during the day, and that we must not all break down for want of rest, lest Lucy should suffer, that he agreed to go. Van Helsing was very kind to him. "Come, my child," he said. "Come with me. You are sick and weak and have had much sorrow and much mental pain, as well as that tax on your strength that we know of. You must not be alone, for to be alone is to be full of tears and alarms. Come to the drawing room, where there is a big fire and there are two sofas. You shall lie on one and I on the other, and our sympathy will be comfort to each other, even though we do not speak and even if we sleep." Arthur went off with him, casting back a longing look on Lucy's face, which lay in her pillow almost whiter than the lawn. She lay quite still, and I looked round the room to see that all was as it should be. I could see that the professor had carried out in this room, as in the other, his purpose of using the garlic. The whole of the window sashes reeked with it, and round Lucy's neck, over the silk handkerchief, which Van Helsing had made her keep on, was a rough chaplet of the same odorous flowers. Lucy was breathing somewhat stertorously. That's the second time they used that word. Lucy was breathing somewhat stertorously, and her face was at its worst. For the open mouth showed the pale gums. Her teeth, in the dim, uncertain light, seemed longer and sharper than they had been in the morning. In particular, by some trick of the light, the canine teeth looked longer and sharper than the rest. I sat down by her, and presently she moved uneasily. At the same moment there came a sort of dull flapping or buffeting at the window. I went over to it softly and peeped out by the corner of the blind. There was a full moonlight, and I could see that the noise was made by a great bat, which wheeled round, doubtless attracted by the light, although so dim, and every now and again struck the window with its wings. When I came back to my seat, I found that Lucy had moved slightly and had torn away the garlic flowers from her throat. I replaced them as well as I could and sat watching her. Presently she woke, and I gave her food, as Van Helsing had prescribed. She took but a little, and that languidly. There did not seem to be with her now the unconscious struggle for life and strength that had hitherto so marked her illness. It struck me as curious that the moment she became conscious she pressed the garlic flowers close to her. It was it was certainly odd that whenever she got into the lethargic state, with the stertorous breathing, she put the flowers from her, but that when she waked she clutched them close. There was no possibility of making any mistake about this, for in the long hours that followed she had many spells of sleeping and waking, and repeated both actions many times. At 6 o'clock Van Helsing came to relieve me. Arthur had then fallen into a doze, and he mercifully let him sleep on. When he saw Lucy's face, I could hear the sissing in-draw of his breath, and he said to me in a sharp whisper, "Draw up the blind. I want the light." Then he bent down, and with his face almost touching Lucy's, examined her carefully. He removed the flowers and lifted the silk handkerchief from her throat. As he did so, he started back, and I could hear his ejaculation, "Mein Gott!" As it was smothered in his throat, I bent over and looked, too, as I noticed some queer chill came over me. The wounds on the throat had absolutely disappeared. For fully 5 minutes Van Helsing stood looking at her, and with his face at its sternest. Then he turned to me and said calmly, "She is dying. It will not be long now. It will be much different, mark me. Whether she dies conscious or in her sleep, wake the poor boy and let him come. And she the last. He trusts us, and we had promised him." I went to the dining room and waked him. He was dazed for a moment, but when he saw the sunlight streaming in through the edges of the shutters, he thought he was late, and expressed his fear. I assured him that Lucy was still asleep, but told him as gently as I could that both Van Helsing and I feared that the end was near. He covered his face with his hands and slid down on his knees by the sofa, where he remained perhaps a minute with his head buried, praying, whilst his shoulders shook with grief. I took him by the hand and raised him up. "Come," I said. "My dear old fellow, summon all your fortitude. It will be the best and easiest for her." When we came into Lucy's room, I could see that Van Helsing had, with his usual forethought, been putting matters straight and making everything look as pleasing as possible. He had even brushed Lucy's hair so that it lay on the pillow in its usual runny, sunny ripples. When we came into the room, she opened her eyes and, seeing him, whispered softly, "Arthur, oh, my love, I'm so glad you have come." He was stooping to kiss her when Van Helsing motioned him back. "No," he whispered, "not yet. Hold her hand. It will comfort her more." So Arthur took his hand and knelt beside her, and she looked her best, with all the soft lines matching the angelic beauty of her eyes. Then gradually her eyes closed, and she sank to sleep. For a little bit her breasts heaved softly, and her breath came and went like a tired child's. And then insensibly there came the strange change which I had noticed in the night. Her breathing grew more stertorous. The mouth opened, and the pale gums, drawn back, made the teeth look longer and sharper than ever. In a sort of sleep-waking, vague, unconscious way, she opened her eyes, which were now dull and hard at once, and said in a soft, voluptuous voice, such as I had never heard from her lips, "Arthur, oh, my love, I am so glad you have come. Kiss me." Arthur bent eagerly over to kiss her, but at that instant Van Helsing, who, like me, had been startled by her voice, swooped upon him, and catching him by the neck with a fury of strength which I have never thought he could have possessed, and actually hurled him almost across the room. Not for your life," he said.
Not for your living soul and hers.
And he stood between them like a lion at bay. Arthur was so shaken aback that he did not for a moment know what to do or say, and before any impulse of violence could seize him, he realized the place and the occasion, and stood silent, waiting. I kept my eyes fixed on Lucy, as did Van Helsing, and he saw a spasm as of rage flit like a shadow over her face. The sharp teeth clamped the, the sharp teeth champed together. Then her eyes closed and she breathed heavily. Very shortly after, she opened her eyes in all their softness, and putting out her poor, pale, thin hand, took Van Helsing's, Van Helsing's great brown one, drawing it to her. She kissed it. My true friend, she said in a faint voice, but with untellable pathos. My true friend and his, oh, guard him and give me peace.
I swear it,
he said solemnly, kneeling beside her, holding up his hand as one who registers an oath. Then he turned to Arthur and said to him,
Come, my child, take her hand in yours and kiss her on the forehead, and only once.
Their eyes met instead of their lips, and so they parted. Lucy's eyes closed, and Van Helsing, who had been watching closely, took Arthur's arm and drew him away. Then Lucy's breathing became more stertorous again, and all at once it ceased.
It is all over, said Van Helsing. She is dead.
I took Arthur by the arm and led him away to the drawing room, where he sat down and covered his face with his hands, sobbing in a way that nearly broke me down to see. I went back to the room and found Van Helsing looking at poor Lucy, as his face was sterner than ever. Some change had come over her body. Death had given back part of her beauty, for her brow and cheeks had recovered some of their flowing lines. Even the lips had lost their deadly pallor. It was as if the blood no longer needed it was as if the blood no longer needed for the working of the heart had gone to make the harshness of death a little rude as might be. We thought her dying whilst she slept, and sleeping when she died. I stood beside Van Helsing and said, Ah, well, poor girl, there is peace for her at last. It is the end. He turned to me and said with grave solemnity,
Not so. Alas, not so. It is only the beginning.
When I asked him what he meant, he only shook his head and answered,
We can do nothing as yet. Wait and see.
Ooh. Ah, poor Lucy. I knew it was coming, but at the same time, still sad about it. She can at least rest easy knowing she caused no harm to Arthur, at least physical harm. Watching your significant other pass away is an unimaginable pain, especially a slow, lingering illness like what Lucy was going through. I can only even begin to imagine. All right, we are between chapters. It is a little over an hour and a half in to the stream. I'm going to take a quick 5-minute break, refill my water bottle, and I will be right back. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else that is listening. Once again, this is Vexing Cat. I am here to share my love of classic literature, and I just wanted to say I appreciate each and every one of you that are listening. And if you aren't a follower already, I would appreciate it if you did so. I am almost to the level of affiliate. I've got my hours, I've got all of my other benchmarks. Now I just need 50 kind souls to say that they like me enough to follow me. So we're most of the way there. So we'll see where we can get by Halloween. But this is going to be a long weekend of a lot of streaming. I'm hoping that over the weekend I'll actually see some higher numbers just because realistically, the most people I see in any one of my reading streams is typically Saturday or Sunday night. So I'm reading today, tomorrow, and Sunday. You know, fingers crossed I don't get sick or something horrible happens between now and then, knock on wood. Uh, I'm just really excited to get through Bram Stoker's Dracula. At this point, we're about just under halfway through the book. By the end of today, we will be over halfway through the book. So we're getting there. Um, I'm going to try and read. I'll have a longer stream on Halloween Day because I just kind of want to get through as much of the book as I can on Halloween. And then whatever's left, I will wrap up on the 1st. So that'll give me Monday and Monday to take a complete break because it's a long weekend, and then I'll do Tuesday, which I don't normally do, and Wednesday. My normal schedule for those of you that are new here is Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday typically, unless I'm reading something extraneously large like Bram Stoker's Dracula. Now, I'm still debating. I'm really leaning into the idea of doing Little Women, but again, that is an epic. That is 163,000 plus words. I believe it's a 70-page or 70-chapter novel. Um, I might have to rethink my strategy a little bit for November because that one book will take the entirety of November, and I feel like maybe doing some variety, maybe changing it up and do like Wednesdays read poetry because that's kind of a quieter day and I can discuss my thoughts and ideas about poetry, read some of my own, for instance, and then on Fridays and Sundays be more specific to reading this sort of content. Classic literature, uploading those chapters, as I said prior to this, one by one onto YouTube and getting, I don't know, just kind of slowly growing the fan base. I've found a couple of scripts that are open source on Reddit that I was looking at possibly reading. Um, Kind of the warmer, like, affectionate. How are you having? Are you having a bad day, dear? Just sweet words of encouragement and kindness, because some people, that's all they need is someone to listen and tell them that it's going to be okay. So I hope that all of you are enjoying yourselves, and I will get cracking on the next part of this lovely, lovely book. Let's see here. All right. One more time into the rift, as they might say. Um, this is Vexing Cat, and we are reading Bram Stoker's Dracula, and this is chapter 13. Ooh, what a great, great number, 13 for Halloween. Ah. Dr. Let's see, chapter 13. Dr. Seward's diary continued. The funeral was arranged for the next succeeding day, so that Lucy and her mother might be buried together. I attended to all the ghastly formalities, and the urbane undertaker and the urban and the urbane undertaker proved that his staff were afflicted or blessed with something of his own obsequious suavidity. What a sentence. attended all the ghastly formalities, and the urbane undertaker proved that his staff were afflicted or blessed with something of his own obsequious suavity. Suavity. What a word. With something of his own obsequious suavity. Even the woman who performed the last offices for the dead remarked to me in a confidential, brother professional way when she had come out from the death chamber, "She makes a very beautiful corpse, sir. It's quite a privilege to attend her. It's not too much to say that she will do credit to our establishment." I noticed that Van Helsing never kept far away. This was possible. This was possible from the disordered state of things in the household. There were no relatives at hand, and as Arthur had to be back the next day to attend at his father's funeral, we were unable to notify anyone who should have been bidden. Under the circumstances, Van Helsing and I took it upon ourselves to examine papers, etc. He insisted upon looking over Lucy's papers himself. I asked him why, for I feared that he, being a foreigner, might not be quite aware of English legal requirements, and so might in ignorance make some unnecessary trouble. He answered me, I know, you forget that I am a lawyer as well as a doctor. But this is not altogether for the law. You knew that when you avoided the coroner. I have more than him to avoid. There may be papers more, such as this." As he spoke, he took from his pocketbook the memorandum which had been in Lucy's breast, and which she had torn in her sleep. Okay. When you find anything of the solicitor who is for the late Mrs. Westenra, seal all her papers, and write him tonight. For me, I watch here in the room and in Miss Lucy's old room all night, and I find myself search for what may be. It is not well that her very thoughts go into the hands of strangers." I went on with my part of the work, and in another half hour had found the name and address of Miss Westenra's solicitor, and had written to him. All the poor lady's papers were in order. Explicit directions regarding the place of burial were given. I had hardly sealed the letter when, to my surprise, Van Helsing walked into the room, saying, "Can you help, friend John? I am free, and if I may, my service is to you." "What have you got? Have you got what you look for?" I asked, to which he replied, "I did not look for any specific thing. I only hoped to find I have all that there was, only some letters and a few memoranda and a diary new begun. But I have them here, and we shall for the present say nothing of them. I shall see the poor lad tomorrow evening, and with his sanction I shall use some." When we had finished the work in hand, he said to me, "And now, friend John, I think we may be bed. We want sleep, both you and I, and rest to recuperate. Tomorrow we shall have much to do, but for the tonight there is no need for us, alas." Before turning in, we went to look at poor Lucy. The undertaker had certainly done his work well, for the room was turned into a small chapelle ardente. There was a wilderness of beautiful white flowers, and death was made as little repulsive as might be. The end of the winding sheet was laid over the face. When the professor bent over and turned it gently back, we both stared at the beauty before us, the tall wax candle showing a sufficient light to note it well. All Lucy's loveliness had come back to her in death, and the hours that had passed, instead of leaving traces of decay effacing fingers, had but restored had but restored the beauty of life, till positively I could not believe my eyes that I was looking at a corpse. The professor looked sternly grave. He had not loved her as I had, and there was no need. There we go. He had not loved her as I had, and there was no need for tears in his eyes. He said to me, "Remain till I return," and left the room. And he came back with a handful of wild garlic from the box waiting in the hall, but which had not been opened, and placed the flowers amongst the others on and around the bed. Then he took from his neck inside his collar, then he took from his neck inside his collar a little gold crucifix, and placed it over the mouth. He restored the sheet to its place, and we came away. I was undressing in my own rooms when, with a premonitory, when with a premonitory tap at the door he entered, and at once began to speak. "Tomorrow I want you to bring me, before night, a set of post-mortem knives." "Must we make an autopsy?" "Must we make an autopsy?" I asked. "Yes and no. I want to operate, but not as you think. Let me tell you now but not a word to another. I want to cut off her head and take out her heart. Ah, you're a surgeon, and you so shocked. You, whom I have seen with no tremble of hand or heart, do operations of life and death that make the rest shudder. Oh, but I must not forget, my dear friend John, that you loved her, and I have not forgotten it, for it is I that shall operate, and you must only help. I would like to do it tonight, but for Arthur I must not. He will be free after his father's funeral tomorrow, and he will want to see her to see it. Then, when she is confined ready for the next day, you and I shall come when all sleep. We shall unscrew the coffin lid and shall do our operation, and then replace all to that, so that none know save we alone." "But why do it at all? The girl is dead. Why mutilate her poor body without need? And if there is no necessity for a post-mortem, and nothing to gain by it, no good to her, to us, to science, to human knowledge, why do it? Without such it is monstrous." For answer he put his hand on my shoulder and said with infinite tenderness, "Friend John, I pity your poor bleeding heart, and I love you the more because it does so bleed. If I could, I would take on myself the burden that you do bear. But there are things that you know not, but that you shall know. And bless me for knowing, though they are not pleasant things. John, my child, you have been my friend for many years, and yet did you ever know me to do anything without good cause? I may err. I am but man, but I believe in all I do. Was it not for these causes that you sent for me when the great trouble came? Yes. Were you not amazed, nay horrified, when I would not let Arthur kiss his love, though she was dying, and snatched him away by all my strength? Yes, and yet you saw how she thanked me, with her so beautiful dying eyes, her voice too so weak. She kissed my rough old hand and blessed me. Yes, and did you not hear me swear a promise to her that so she closed her eyes grateful? Yes." Well, I have good reason. Well,
I have good reason now for all I want to do. You have for many years trust me, you have believed me weeks past, when there be things so strange that you might have well doubt. Believe me yet a little, friend John. If you trust me not, then I must tell what I think, and that is not perhaps well. And if I work as work I shall, no matter trust or no trust. Without my friend trust in me, I work with heavy heart and feel so lonely when I want all help and courage that may be.
He paused a moment and went on solemnly.
Friend John, there are strange and terrible days before us. Let us not be two but one, that so we work to a good end. Will you not have faith in me?
I took his hand and promised him. I held my door open as he went away and watched him go into his room and close the door. As I stood without moving, I saw one of the maids pass silently among along the passage. She had her back towards me, so did not see me, and go into the room where Lucy lay. The sight touched me. Devotion is so rare, and we are so grateful to those who show it unasked to those who we love. To those we love. Here was a poor girl putting aside the terrors which she naturally had of death, to go watch alone by the bier of the mistress whom she loved, so that the poor clay might not be lonely till laid to eternal rest. I must have slept long and soundly, for it was broad daylight when Van Helsing waked me by coming into my room. He went over to my bedside and said, You need no trouble about the knives. We shall not do it. Why not? I asked, for his solemnity of the night before had greatly impressed me.
Because, he said sternly, it is too late, or too early. See?
Here he held up the little golden crucifix.
This was stolen in the night.
How stolen? I asked in wonder, since you have it now.
Because I get it back from the worthless wretch who stole it, from the woman who robbed the dead and the living. Her punishment will surely come, but not through me. She knew not altogether what she did, and thus, unknowing, she only stole. Now we must wait.
He went away on the word, leaving me with a new mystery to think of, a new puzzle to grapple with. The forenoon was a dreary time, but at noon the solicitor came. Mr. Marquand of Holman, Sons, Marquand and Litterdale. He was very genial and very appreciative of what we had done, and took off our hands all cares as to details. During lunch he told us that Mrs. Westenra had for some time expected sudden death from her heart, and had put her affairs in absolute order. He informed us that, with the exception of a certain entailed property of Lucy's father, which now, in default of direct issue, went back to a distant branch of the family, the whole estate, real and personal, was left absolutely to Arthur Holmwood. When he had told us so much, he went on. When he had told us so much, he went on. There should be a pause there, and it doesn't feel right. When he had told us so much, he went on. Frankly, we did our best to prevent such a testamentary disposition, and pointed out certain contingencies that might leave her daughter either penniless or not so free as she should be to act regarding a matrimonial alliance. Indeed, we pressed the matter so far that we almost came into collision, for she asked us if we were or were not prepared to carry out her wishes. Of course, we had then no alternative but to accept. We were right in principle, and 99 times out of 100 we should have proved, by the logic of events, the accuracy of our judgment. Frankly, however, I must admit that in this case any other form of disposition would have rendered impossible the carrying out of her wishes, for by her own predeceasing her daughter the latter would have come into possession of the property, and even had she only survived her mother by 5 minutes, her property would, in case there was no will, and a will was a practical impossibility in such a case, have been treated at her decease as is under intestacy. In which case Lord Godalming though so dear a friend would have had no claim in the world, and the inheritors, being remote, would not be likely to abandon their just right for sentimental reasons, regarding an entire stranger. I assure you, my dear sirs, I am rejoiced at the result, perfectly rejoiced. He was a good fellow, but his rejoicing at the one little part in which he was officially interested of so great a tragedy was an object lesson in the limitations of sympathetic understanding. He did not remain long, but said he would look in later in the day and see Lord Godalming. His coming, however, had been a certain comfort to us, since it assured us that we would not have to since it is okay. Since it assured us that we should not have to dread hostile criticism as to any of our acts, Arthur was expected at 5 o'clock, so a little before that time we visited the death chamber. It was so, in very truth, for now both mother and daughter lay in it. The undertaker, true to his craft, had made the best display he could of his goods, and there was a mortuary air about the place that lowered our spirits at once. Van Helsing ordered the former arrangement to be adhered to, explaining that, as Lord Godalming was coming very soon, it would be less harrowing to his feelings to see all that was left of his fiancée quite alone. The undertaker seemed shocked at his own stupidity, and exerted himself to restore things to the condition in which we left them the night before, so that when Arthur came, such shocks to his feelings as we could avoid were saved. Poor fellow! He looked desperately sad and broken. Even his stalwart manhood seemed to have shrunk somewhat under the strain of his much tried emotions. He had, I knew, been very genuine and devotedly attached to his father, and to lose him at such a time was a bitter blow to him. With me he was warm as ever, and to Van Helsing he was sweetly courteous. But I could not help seeing that there was some constraint with him. The professor noticed it too, and motioned me to bring him upstairs. I did so, and left him at the door of the room, as I felt he would like to be quite alone with her. But he took my arm and led me in, saying huskily, "You loved her too, old fellow. She told me all about it, and there was no friend had a closer place in her heart than you. I don't know how to thank you for all you have done for her. I can't think yet." Here he suddenly broke down and threw his arms round my shoulders and laid his head on my breast, crying, "Oh, Jack, Jack, what shall I do? The whole of life seems gone from me at once, and there is nothing in the wide world for me to live for." I comforted him as well as I could, and in such cases men do not need much expression. A grip of the hand, the tightening of an arm over the shoulder, a sob in unison, are expressions of sympathy, dear. Are expressions of sympathy dear to a man's heart. I stood still and silent till his sobs died away, and then I said softly to him, "Come and look at her." Together we moved over to the bed, and I lifted the lawn from her face. God, how beautiful she was! Every hour seemed to be enhancing her loveliness. It frightened and amazed me somewhat, and as for Arthur, he fell a trembling, and finally was shaken with doubt as with an ague. At last, after a long pause, he said to me in a faint whisper, "Jack, is she really dead?" I assured him sadly that it was so, and went on to suggest, for I felt that such a horrible doubt should not have life for a moment longer than I could help, and it often happened that after death faces became softened and even resolved into their youthful beauty, that this was especially so when death had been preceded by an acute or prolonged suffering. It seemed to quite do away with any doubt, and after kneeling beside the couch for a while and looking at her lovingly and long, he turned aside. I told him that must be that must be goodbye, as the coffin had to be prepared. So he went back and took her dead hand in his and kissed it, and bent over and kissed her forehead. He came away, fondly looking back over his shoulder at her as he came. I left him in the drawing room and told Van Helsing that he had said goodbye. So the latter went to the kitchen to tell the undertaker's men to proceed with the preparations and screw up the coffin. When he came out of the room again, I told him of Arthur's question, and he replied, "I am not surprised. Just now I doubted for a moment myself." We all dined together, and I could see that poor Art was trying to make the best of things. Van Helsing had been silent all dinner time. But when we had lit our cigars, he said, "Lord?" But Arthur interrupted him. "No, no, not that, for God's sake, not yet at any rate. Forgive me, sir, I did not mean to speak offensively. It is only because my loss is so recent." The professor answered very sweetly, "I only used that name because I was in doubt. I must not call you Mister. And I have grown to love you, yes? Love you, yes, my dear boy, to love you, as Arthur." Arthur held out his hand and took the old man's warmly. "Call me what you will." "Call me what you will," he said. "I hope I may always have the title of friend, and let me say that I am at a loss for words to thank you for your goodness to my poor dear." He paused a moment and went on, "I know that she understood your goodness even better than I do, and if I was rude or in any way wanting at that time, you acted so. You remember." The professor nodded. "You must forgive me," he answered with a grave kindness. "I know it was hard for you to quite trust me then, for to trust such violence needs to understand, and I take it that you do not, that you cannot. Trust me now, for you do not yet understand. And there may be more times when I shall not want you to trust when you cannot, and may not, and must not yet understand. But the time will come when your trust shall be whole and complete in me, and when you shall understand as though the sunlight himself shone through. Then you shall bless me for first to last, for your own sake and for the sake of others, and for her dear sake to whom I swore to protect." "And indeed, sir," said Arthur warmly, "I shall in all ways trust you. I know and believe you have a very noble heart, and you are Jack's friend, and you were hers, and you shall do what you like." The professor cleared his throat a couple of times, though about to speak, and finally said, "May I ask you something now?" "Certainly." "You know that Mrs. Westenra left you Westenra. You know that you know that Mrs. Westenra left you all her property?" "No, poor dear, I never thought of it." "And as it is yours, you have a right to deal with it as you will. I want you to give me permission to read all Miss Lucy's papers and letters. Believe me, it is no idle curiosity. I have a motive of which, be sure, she would have approved. I have them all here. I took them before we knew that all was yours, so that no strange hand might touch them, no strange eye might look through words into her soul. I shall keep them, if I may. Even you may not see them yet, but I shall keep them safe. No word shall be lost, and in a good time I shall give them back to you. It's a hard thing I ask, but you will do it, will you not, for Lucy's sake?" Arthur spoke out heartily, like his old self. "Dr. Van Helsing, you may do what you will. I feel that in saying this I am doing what my dear one would have approved. I shall not trouble you with questions till the time comes." The old press the old professor stood up as he said solemnly,
And you are right. There will be pain for us all, but it will not be old pain, nor will this pain be the last. We and you too. We and you too, you most of all, my dear boy, will have to pass through the bitter water before we reach the sweet. But we must be brave of heart and unselfish and do our duty, and all will be well.
I slept on a sofa in Arthur's room that night. Van Helsing did not go to bed at all. He went to and fro as if patrolling the house, and was never out of sight of the room where Lucy lay in her coffin, strewn with the wild garlic flowers, which sent through the odor of lily and rose a heavy, overpowering smell into the night. Mina Harker's Journal, 22 September. In the train to Exeter, Jonathan's sleeping. It seems only yesterday that the last entry was made. And yet, how much between then in Whitby and all the world before me, Jonathan away and no news of him, and now married to Jonathan. Jonathan, a solicitor, a partner, rich, master of his business, Mr. Hawkins dead and buried, and Jonathan with another attack that may harm him. Some day he may ask me about it. Down it all goes. I am rusty in my shorthand. See what unexpected prosperity does for us. So it may be as well to freshen it up again with an exercise anyhow. The service was simple and very solemn. There were only ourselves and the servants there, one or two old friends of his from Exeter, his London agent, and a gentleman representing Sir John Paxton, the president of the Incorporated Law Society. Jonathan and I stood hand in hand, and we felt that our best and dearest friend was gone from us. We came back to town quietly, taking a bus to Hyde Park Corner. Jonathan thought it would interest me to go into the Row for a while, so we sat down, but there were very few people there, and it was sad looking and desolate. It was sad looking and desolate to see so many empty chairs. It made us think of the empty chair at home. So we got up and walked down to Piccadilly. Jonathan was holding me by the arm the way he used to in the old days before I went to school. I felt it very improper, for you can't go on for some years teaching etiquette and decorum to other girls without the pedantry of it biting into yourself a bit. But it was Jonathan, and he was my husband, and we didn't know anybody who saw us. And we didn't care if they did. So on we walked. I was looking at a very beautiful girl in a big cartwheel hat, sitting in a victoria outside of Giuliano's, when I felt Jonathan clutch my arm so tight that he hurt me, and he said under his breath, "My God, I am always anxious about Jonathan. My God, I am always anxious about Jonathan, for I fear that some nervous fit may upset him again. So I turned to him quickly and asked him what it was that disturbed him. He was very pale, and his eyes seemed bulging out as bulging out as half in terror and half in amazement he gazed at a tall thin man with a beaky nose and black mustache and pointed beard, who was also observing the pretty girl. He was looking at her so hard that he did not see either of us, and so I had a good view of him. His face was not a good face. It was hard and cruel and sensual, and his big white teeth, that looked all the whiter because his lips were so red, were pointed like an animal's. Jonathan kept staring at him till I was afraid he would notice. I feared he might take it ill. He looked so fierce and nasty. I asked Jonathan why he was disturbed, and he answered, evidently thinking that I knew as much about it as he did. "Do you not see who it is?" "No, dear," I said. "I do not know him. Who is it?" His answer seemed to shock and thrill me, for it was said as if he did not know that it was me, Mina, to whom he was speaking. "It is the man himself." The poor dear was evidently terrified at something, very greatly terrified. I do believe that if he had not had me to lean on and to support him, he would have sunk down. He kept staring. A man came out of the shop with a small parcel and gave it to the lady, who then drove off. The dark man kept his eyes fixed on her, and when the carriage moved up Piccadilly, he followed in the same direction and hailed a hansom. Jonathan kept looking after him and said as if to himself, "I believe it is the Count, but he has grown young. My God, if this be so, oh my God, if I only knew, if I only knew." He was distressing himself so much that I feared to keep his mind on the subject by asking him any questions. So I remained silent. I drew him away quietly, and he, holding my arm, came easily. We walked a little further, and then went in and sat for a while in the Green Park. It was a hot day for autumn, and there was a comfortable seat in a shady place. After a few minutes staring at nothing, Jonathan's eyes closed, and he went quietly into a sleep. With his head on his shoulder, I thought it was the best thing for him, so I did not disturb him. It was about 20 minutes. He woke up and said to me, quite cheerfully, "Why, Mina, I been asleep? Oh, do forgive me for being so rude. Come, and we'll have a cup of tea somewhere." He had evidently forgotten all about the dark stranger. As in his illness he had forgotten all of this episode and reminded him that forgotten all that this episode had reminded him of. I didn't like this lapsing into forgetfulness. It may make or continue some injury to the brain. I must not ask him, for I fear I shall do more harm than good, but I must somehow learn the facts of this journey, of his journey abroad. The time is come, I fear, when I must open the parcel and know what is written. Oh, Jonathan, you will, I know, forgive me if I do wrong, but it is for your own sake. Later, later. A sad homecoming in every way, the house empty of the dear soul who was so good to us. Jonathan, still pale and dizzy under a slight relapse of his malady, and now a telegram from Van Helsing, whoever he may be. "You will be grieved to hear that Mrs. Westenra died 5 days ago, and that Lucy died the day before yesterday. They were both buried today." Oh, what a wealth of sorrow in a few words! Poor Mrs. Westenra! Poor Lucy! Gone, gone, never to return to us. And poor Arthur! To have lost such sweetness out of his life. God help us all to bear our troubles. Okay. Dr. Seward's diary. 22 September. It is all over. Arthur has gone back to Ring and has taken Quincy Morris with him. What a fine fellow is Quincy. I believe in my heart of hearts that he suffered as much about Lucy's death as any of us. But he bore himself through it like a moral Viking. If America can go on breeding men like that, she will be a power in the world indeed. The irony. The irony. Okay. Van Helsing is lying down having a rest preparatory preparatory to his journey. He goes over to Amsterdam tonight, but says tomorrow. He returns tomorrow night. That he only wants to make some arrangements which can only be made personally. He is to stop with me then. If he can, he says he has work to do in London, which may take him some time. Poor old fellow. I fear that the strain of the past week has broken down even his iron strength. All the time of burial he was, I could see, putting some terrible restraint on himself. When it was all over, we were standing beside Arthur, who, poor fellow, was speaking of his part in the operation, where his blood had been transfused to his Lucy's veins. I could see Van Helsing's face grow white and purple by turns. Arthur was saying that he felt since then as if they two had been really married, and that she was his wife in the sight of God. None of us said a word of the other operations, and none of us ever shall. Arthur and Quincy went away together to the station, and Van Helsing and I came on here. The moment we were alone in the carriage, he gave way to a regular fit of hysterics. He has denied to me since that it was hysterics, and insisted that it was only his sense of humor asserting itself under very terrible conditions. He laughed till he cried, and I had to draw down the blinds lest anyone should see us and misjudge. And then he cried till he laughed again, and laughed and cried together, just as a woman does. Fuck you, Bram Stoker. The fuck? Oh, Jesus. All right. I tried to be stern with him as one is to a woman under the circumstances, but it had no effect. Men and women are so different in manifestations of nervous strength, of weakness, or weakness. Then, when his face grew grave and stern again, I asked him why his mirth, and why at such a time. His reply was in a way characteristic of him, for it was logical and forceful and mysterious. He said, "Oh, so it was hmm, Van Helsing. Van Helsing's the one in the carriage with him. Okay, so Van Helsing's the one in hysterics, crying and laughing and crying again and crying and laughing at the same time." Okay. Ah. His reply was in a way characteristic of him, and for it was logical and forceful and mysterious. He said, "Ah, you don't comprehend, friend John. Do not think that I am not sad, though I laugh. See, I have cried even when the laugh did choke me, but no more than think I am all sorry for when I cry. For the laugh he comes just the same. Keep the way with you. The laughter who knock at your door and say, 'May I come in?' is not the true laughter. No, he is a king, and he come when and how he like. He asked no person. He chose no time of suitability. He say, 'I am here. Behold, in example, I grieve my heart out for that so sweet young girl. I give my blood for her, though I am old and worn. I give my time, my skill, my sleep. I let my other sufferers want that so she may have all. And yet I can laugh at her very grave. Laugh when laugh when the clay from the spade of the sexton drop upon her coffin and say thud thud to my heart till it send back the blood from my cheek. My heart bleed for that poor boy, that dear boy who so of the age of mine own boy, that I had been so blessed that he live, and with his hair and eyes the same. There, you know now why I love him so. And yet, Finn, he say things that touch my husband heart to the quick, and make my father heart yearn to him as to no other man, not even to you, friend John. For we are more level in experience than father and son. Yet, even at such moment, King laugh. He come to me and shout and bellow in my ear, 'Here I come, here I am, here I am, here I am,' till the blood come dance back and bring some of the sunshine that
that he carry with him to my cheek. Oh, friend John, it is a strange world, a sad world, a world full of miseries and woes and troubles, and yet when King Laugh come, he make them all dance to the tune he play. Bleeding heart and dry bones of the churchyard and the tears that burn as they fall all dance together to the music that he make with that smileless mouth of him. And believe me, friend John, that he is good to come and kind. Ah, we men and women alike, ropes drawn tight with strain that pull us different ways. Then tears come, and like the rain on the ropes, they brace us up until perhaps the strain become too great and we break. But King Laugh he come like the sunshine and he ease off the strain again and we bear to go on with our labor, what it may be.
I did not like to wound him by pretending not to see his idea, but as I did not yet understand the cause of his laughter, I asked him, and he answered me. His face grew stern, and he said in quite a different tone,
Oh, it was the grim irony of it all. This so lovely lady, garlanded with flowers, that looked so fair as life, till one by one we wondered if she were truly truly dead. She laid in that so fine marble house, in that lonely churchyard, where rest so many of her kin, laid there with her mother, who loved her and whom she loved, and that sacred bell going toll, 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 and so sad and slow, and those holy men with their white garments and of the angel pretending to read books, and yet all the time, their eyes never on the page, and all of us with bowed head, and all for what? She is dead. So, is it not?
"Well, for the life of me, Professor," I said, "I can't see anything to laugh at in all that. Why, your explanation makes it a harder puzzle than before. But even if the burial service was comic, what about poor Art and his trouble? Why, his heart was simply breaking."
Just so. Said he not that the transfusion of his blood in her veins had made her truly his bride?
Yes, and it was a sweet and comforting idea for him.
Quite so. But there was a difficulty, friend John. If so that, then what about the others? Ho ho ho! This so sweet maid is a polyandrist, and me with my poor wife, dead to me but alive by church's law, though no wit, no wits, all gone. Even I, whom am faithful husband to this now no wife, am bigamist. Now no wife, am bigamist.
"I don't see where the joke comes in there either," I said, and did not feel particularly pleased with him for saying such things. He laid his hand on my arm and said,
Friend John, forgive me if I pain. I showed not my feelings to others when it would wound, but only to you, my friend, whom I trust. If you could have looked into my very heart, then when I want to laugh, you could have done so when the laugh arrived. If you could do so now when King Laugh have packed up his crown and all that is to him, for he go far, far away from me, and for a long, long time, maybe you would perhaps pity me the most of all.
I was touched by the tenderness of his tone and asked why.
Because I know.
And now we are all scattered, and for many a long day, loneliness will sit over our roofs. Oh, is that him or? Yeah, that's Dr. Stewart. Dr. Seward. And now we are all scattered, and for many a long day, loneliness will sit over our roofs and with brooding wings. Sit over our roofs with brooding wings. Lucy lies in the tomb of her kin, a lordly death house in a lonely churchyard away from teeming London, where the air is fresh and the sun rises over Hampstead Hill, and where wildflowers grow of their own accord. So, I can finish this diary, and God only knows if I shall ever begin another. If I do, or if I even open this again, it will be a deal with different people and different themes. For here at the end, where the romance of my life is told, ere I go back to take up the thread of my life work, I say sadly and without hope, Fini. Too quick. Stretch, stretch, stretch. Okay. Hydration. The Westminster Gazette, 25 September. A Hampstead Mystery. The neighborhood of Hampstead is just at present exercised with a series of events which seem to run on lines parallel to those of what was known to the writers of headlines as the Kensington Horror, or the Stabbing Woman, or the Woman in Black. During the past 2 or 3 days, several cases have occurred of young children straying from home or neglecting to return from their playing on the heath. In all these cases, the children were too young to give any properly intelligible account of themselves. But the consensus of their excuses is that they had been with a bloofer lady. It has always been late in the evening when they have been missed, and on 2 occasions the children have not been found until early in the following morning. It is generally supposed in the neighborhood that missing as the first child missed gave as his reason for being away that a bloofer lady had asked him to come for a walk, the others had picked up the phrase and used it as occasion served. This is the more natural as the favorite game of the little ones at present is luring each other away by wiles. A correspondent writes us that to see some of the tiny tots pretending to be the bloofer lady is supremely funny. Some of our caricaturists, oh man, that's a word. Some of our caricaturists, some of our caricaturists Yeah. Some of our caricaturists might, he says, take a lesson in the irony of grotesque by comparing the reality and the picture. It is only in accordance with general principles of human nature that the bloofer lady should be the popular role of these al fresco performances. Our correspondent naively says that even Ellen Terry could not be so winningly attractive as some of these grubby-faced little children pretend and even imagine themselves to be. There is, however, possibly a serious side to the question, for some of the children, indeed all who have been missed at night, have been slightly torn or wounded in the throat. The wounds seem such as might be made by a rat or a very small dog, and although of not much importance individually, would tend to show that whatever animal inflicts them has a system or method of its own. The police of the division have been instructed to keep a sharp lookout for straying children, especially when very young, in and around Hampstead Heath, and for any stray dog which may be about. The Westminster Gazette, 25 September, extra special. The Hampstead Horror. Another child injured. The bloofer lady. We have just received intelligence that another child missed last night. Was only discovered late in the morning under a furze bush at the Shooter's Hill side of Hampstead Heath, which is perhaps less frequented than the other parts. It has the same tiny wound in the throat as has been noticed in other cases. It was terribly weak and looked quite emaciated. It, too, when partially restored, had the common story to tell of being lured away by the bloofer lady. Oh, spicy. We are at chapter 14. I think I'm going to read through chapter 14 and I'm probably going to call it here after this chapter. So, probably, what is it, another 14 pages, give or take? So, I just wanted to, again, say thank you to all of you that are listening. And if you have any friends or anyone that you think might be interested in this kind of content, I'm hoping to get each chapter up on YouTube so people can listen at their own leisure. And then if they wanted to, as a playlist, it'll be one continuous book. And then I'll do all of my books that way. I am doing my very best here. I have one more chapter in me. I know I do. At this point, we are about halfway through the book. So, as I said previously, after I finish this next chapter, number 14, we will be over halfway through the book. And I have really been enjoying the book. I really enjoy the story. I like all of these different letters in sequential order. There are other books that I have read that are back and forth and back and forth, and I'm not as much of a fan of because they're kind of confusing to me. There are like, like forward in time, backward in time, forward in time, the present, the back in time. I don't like these are all like within like back and forth in time, but like a day or maybe 2 days at max. And then it continues in like a sequential order, no matter who it is that's involved, whether it's Mina, whether it's our dearly departed Lucy, whether it's Jonathan, whether it's, the Dr. Seward. Jack is doing his very best. Um, Even Mr. Quincy, who our dear friend from Texas that was very much in love with Miss Lucy. Van Helsing, again, all of them, they're keeping a similar timeline, and I really enjoy that. So even though it has these like different tones and ideas and like styles of character between them, they're all of them, each of them, um, written kind of the same. There have been a few times though I'm just like blown away at the at some of the things that Bram says or would say that a woman would say. It's like no, maybe for her time, maybe it's possible in the 1800s that, you know, I guess it would be 1900s. It's entirely possible that a woman would say things and act the way that he's describing them as. But by modern standards, absolutely not. As you can see, we are up to 35 out of 50. We're past the halfway point. We're almost where I need to be to make affiliate. I'm hoping to see that number by the end of the month. If it happens, awesome. If it doesn't happen, it is what it is. I'm going to keep reading. So if you can swing by and give us a listen, awesome. And if not, you can always go back and rewatch the books at a later time. So stretch if you haven't done so. We are between chapters, so stay hydrated. So if you're listening and working on something else, or if you're just listening and relaxing, remember, drink some water. Okay, here we go. Chapter 14, Mina Harker's Journal. 23 September. Jonathan is better after a bad night. I am so glad that he has plenty of work to do, for that keeps his mind off the terrible things, and oh, I am rejoiced that he is not now weighed down with the responsibility of his new position. I knew he would be true to himself, and now how proud I am to see my Jonathan rising to the height of his advancement and keeping pace in all ways with the duties that come upon him. He will be away all day till late, for he said he could not lunch at home. My household work is done, so I shall take his foreign journal and lock myself up in my room and read it. 24 September. I hadn't the heart to write last night. That terrible record of Jonathan's upset me so. Poor dear. How he must have suffered, whether it be truly or only imagination. I wonder if there is any truth in it at all. Did he get his brain fever and then write all those terrible things? Or had he some cause for it all? I suppose I shall never know, for I dare not open the subject to him. And yet that man we saw yesterday, he seemed quite certain of him. Poor fellow! I suppose it was the funeral upset him. It was the funeral upset him, and sent his mind back on some train of thought. He believes it all himself. I remember how on our wedding day he said, unless some solemn duty come upon me to go back to the bitter hours, asleep or awake, mad or sane, there seems to be through it all some thread of continuity. That fearful Count was coming to London. If it should be, and he came to London with his teeming millions, there may be solemn duty, and if it come, we must not shrink from it. I shall be prepared. I shall get my typewriter this very hour and begin transcribing. Then we shall be ready for other eyes if required. And if it be wanted, then perhaps, if I am ready, poor Jonathan may not be upset, for I can speak for him and never let him be troubled or worried with it at all. If ever Jonathan quite gets over their nervousness, he may want to tell me of it all, and I can ask him questions and find out things and see how I may comfort him. Letter Van Helsing to Mrs. Harker. Dear Madam, I pray you to pardon my writing in that I am so far friend as that I sent you sad news of Miss Lucy Westenra's death. But by by the kindness of Lord Godalming, by the kindness of Lord Godalming, I am empowered to read her letters and papers, for I am deeply concerned about certain matters vitally important. In them I find some letters from you which show how great friends you were and how you love her. Oh, Madam Mina, by that love I implore you, help me. It is for others' good that I ask, to redress great wrong, and to lift much good and terrible troubles. That may be more great than you can know. May it be that I see you? You can trust me. I am friend of Dr. John Seward and of Lord Godalming. That was Arthur of Miss Lucy. I must keep it private for the present from all. I should come to Exeter to see you at once if you tell me I am privileged to come. And where and when, I implore your pardon, madam. I have read your letters to poor Lucy, and know how good you are, and how your husband suffers. So I pray you, if it may be, enlighten him not, lest it make harm. Again your pardon, and forgive me, Van Helsing. Telegram Mrs. Harker to Van Helsing. 25 September. Come today by 10:15 train if you can catch it. Can see you at any time. Wilhelmina Harker. Mina Harker's Journal. I cannot help feeling terribly excited as the time draws near for the visit of Dr. Van Helsing, for somehow I expect that it will throw some light upon Jonathan's sad experience, and as he attended poor dear Lucy in her last illness. He can tell me all about her. That is the reason of his coming. It is concerning Lucy and her sleepwalking, and not about Jonathan, that I shall never know the real truth now. How silly I am. That awful journal gets hold of my imagination and tinges everything with something of its own color. Of course, it is about Lucy. That habit came back to the poor dear, and that awful night on the cliff must have made her ill. I had almost forgotten in my own affairs how ill she was afterwards. She must have told him of her sleepwalking adventure on the cliff, and that I knew all about it, and now he wants me to tell him what she knows, so that he may understand. I hope I did right in not saying anything of Mrs. Westenra. Saying anything of it to Mrs. Westenra. I shall never forgive myself if any act of mine, were it even a negative one, brought harm on poor dear Lucy. I hope to. Dr. Van Helsing will not blame me. I have had so much trouble and anxiety of late that I feel I cannot bear more just at present. I suppose a cry does us all good at times, clears the air as other rain does. Perhaps it was reading the journal yesterday that upset me, and then Jonathan went away. This morning to stay away from me a whole day and night. The first time we have been parted since our marriage. I do hope the dear fellow will take care of himself, and that nothing will occur to upset him. It is 2 o'clock, and the doctor will be here soon now. I shall na- I shall say nothing of Jonathan's journal unless he asks me. I am so glad I am typewritten out my own journal. I am so glad I have typewritten out my own journal, so that in case he asks about Lucy, I can hand it to him, and it will save much questioning. Later. He has come and gone. Oh, what a strange meeting, and how it all makes my head whirl round. I feel like one in a dream. Can it can it be all possible? Can it be all possible, or even a part of it? If I had not read Jonathan's journal first, I should never have accepted even a possibility. Poor dear Jonathan, how he must have suffered. Please the good God, all this may not upset him again. I shall try to save him from it, but it may be even a consolation and a help to him, terrible though it be, and awful in its consequences, to know for certain that his eyes and ears and brain did not deceive him, and that it is all true. It may be that it is the doubt which haunts him, that when that doubt is removed, no matter which, waking or dreaming, may prove the truth, he will be more satisfied and better able to bear the shock. Dr. Van Helsing must be a good man as well as a clever one if he is Arthur's friend and Dr. Seward's. And if they brought him all the way from Holland to look after Lucy, I feel from having seen him that he is good and kind and of noble nature. When he comes tomorrow, I shall ask him about Jonathan, and then, please God, all the sorrow and anxiety may lead to a good end. I used to think I would like to practice interviewing. Jonathan's friend on the Exeter News told him that memory was everything in such work, that you must be able to put down exactly almost every word spoken, even if you had to refine some of it afterwards. Here was a rare interview. I shall try to record it verbatim. It was 2:30 when the knock came. I took my courage à deux mains and waited. In a few minutes Mary opened the door and announced Dr. Van Helsing. I rose and bowed, and he came towards me, a man of medium weight, strongly built, with his shoulders set back over a broad, deep chest and a neck well balanced on the trunk as the head is on the neck. The poise of his head strikes one at once as indicative of thought, indicative of thought and power. The head is noble, well sized, broad, and large behind the ears. The face, clean shaven, shows a hard, square chin, a large, resolute, mobile mouth, a good sized nose, rather straight, but with quick, sensitive nostrils. Pause. This is the second time he has gone into as much depth as to go down to the nostrils. Previously, a few chapters back, he literally says, I'm paraphrasing, the nostrils trembled with intent. How are nostrils more mobile and sensitive than I'm aware of? This is just absurd to me. He really likes his noses, I guess, or something. The crooked nose, the wide nose, this nose, the straight nose. He's really fixated on noses. Strange. Okay. The face clean shaven. Yeah, he does have something for noses. The face. The face, clean shaven, shows a hard, square chin, a large, resolute, mobile mouth, a good sized nose, rather straight, but with quick, sensitive nostrils that seem to broaden as the big, bushy brows come down and the mouth tightens. The forehead is broad and fine, rising at first almost straight and then sloping back above two bumps or ridges wide apart. Such a forehead that the reddish hair cannot possibly tumble over it, but falls naturally back into the sides. Big, dark blue eyes widely are set widely apart and are quick and tender or stern with the man's moods. He said to me, "Mrs. Harker, is it not?" I bowed assent. That was Miss Mina Murray? Again, I assented. It is Mina Mary that I came to see, that was friend of the poor dear child Lucy Westenra. Madam Mina, it is on account of the dead I come. Sir, sir, I said, you could have no better claim on me than you were a friend and helper of Lucy Westenra. And I and I held out my hand. He took it and said tenderly, "Oh, Madam Mina, I knew that your friend of that poor Lily girl must be good, but I had yet to learn." He finished his speech with a courtly bow. I asked him what it was that he wanted to see me about, so he at once began. "I have read your letters to Miss Lucy. Forgive me, but I had to begin to inquire somewhere, and there was none to ask. I know that you were with her at Whitby. She sometimes kept a diary, and you need not look surprised. You need not look so surprised, Madam Mina. It was begun after you had left, and was an imitation of you. And in the diary she traces by inference certain things to a sleepwalking in which she puts down that you saved her. In great perplexity, then I come to you and ask you, out of your so much kindness, to tell me all of it that you can remember." I can tell you, I think, Dr. Van Helsing, all about it. "Ah, then you have good memory for facts, for details. It is not always so with young ladies." I swear to God, Bram, you're killing me. It's not always so with young ladies. It's like, for fuck's sakes. For fuck's sakes. No, doctor, but I wrote it all down at the time. I can show it to you if you like. "Oh, my Madam Mina, I will be grateful. You will do me much favor." I could not resist the temptation of mystifying him a bit. I suppose it is some of the trace of the original apple that remains still in our mouths. So I handed him the shorthand diary. He took it with a grateful bow and said, "May I read it?" Some taste of the original apple that remains still in our mouths. Biblical Eve reference? Really, Bram? Well, he is Irish. Maybe they're okay. Lots of like religious history and culture. The orange and the green, Protestants and Catholics, with a white between. Okay. "If you wish," I answered, as demurely as I could. He opened it, and for an instant his face fell. Then he stood up and bowed. "Oh, you so clever woman," he said. "I knew long that Mr. Jonathan was a man of much thankfulness, but see, his wife have all the good things, and will you not so much honor me and so help me as to read it for me? Alas, I know not the shorthand." By this time my little joke was over, and I was almost ashamed, so I took the typewritten copy from my work basket and handed it to him. "Forgive me," I said. "I could not help it, but I had been thinking that it was of dear Lucy that you wished to ask, and so that you might not have time to wait. not on my account, but because I know your time must be precious, I have written it out on the typewriter for you." He took it and his eyes glistened. You are so good," he said. And may I read it now? I may want to ask you some things when I have read." "By all means," I said. "Read it over whilst I order lunch, and then you can ask me questions whilst we eat." He bowed and settled himself and in a chair with his back to the light, and became absorbed in the papers whilst I went to see after lunch, chiefly in order that he might not be disturbed. When I came back, I found him walking hurriedly up and down the room, his face all ablaze with excitement. He rushed up to me and took me by both hands. "Oh, Madam Mina," he said, "how can I say what I owe you? This paper is a sunshine. It opens the gate to me. I am dazed. I am dazzled with so much light, and yet clouds roll in behind the light every time. But that you cannot comprehend. Oh, but I am grateful to you. You so clever woman, madam, madam." There we go. He said this very solemnly. If if ever Abraham Van Helsing can do anything for you or yours, I trust you will let me know. It will be pleasure and delight, and if I may serve you as a friend, but all I have ever learned, all I can ever do shall be for you and those you love. There are darkness in life, and there are lights, and you are one of the lights. You will have happy life and good life, and your husband will be blessed in you." "But, doctor, you praise me too much, and you do not know me."
"Not know you? I who am old, who have studied all my life, and men and women, I who have made my specialty the brain, and all that belongs to him, and all that follow him, and I have read your diary that you have so goodly written for me, and which breathes out truth in every line. I who have read your so sweet letter to poor Lucy of your marriage and your trust, not know you. Oh, Madam Mina, good women tell all their lives, and by day and by hour and by minute, such things that angels can read, and we men who wish to know have in us something of angels' eyes. Your husband is noble nature, and you are noble too, for you trust, and and trust cannot be where there is mean nature. And your husband, tell me of him. Is he quite well? Is all that fear gone? And is he strong and hearty?"
I saw here an opening to ask him about Jonathan, so I said, He was almost recovered, but he has been greatly upset by Mr. Hawkins' death." He interrupted.
"Oh, yes, I know. I have read your last two letters."
I went on. "I suppose this upset him, for when we were in town on Thursday last, he had a sort of shock."
"A shock? And after brain fever so soon? That was not good. What kind of shock was it?"
He thought he saw someone who recalled something terrible, something which led to his brain fever, and here the whole thing seemed to overwhelm me in a rush. The pity for Jonathan, the horror which he experienced, the whole fearful mystery of his diary, the fear that has been brooding over me ever since, all came in a tumult. I suppose I was hysterical, for I threw myself on my knees and held up my hands to him and implored him to make my husband well again. He took my hands and raised me up and made me sit on the sofa and sat by me. He held my hands in his and said to me with, oh, such infinite sweetness, my life is a barren and lonely one, and so full of work that I have not had much time for friendships. But since I have been summoned to here by my friend John Seward, I have known so many good people.
and seen such nobility that I feel more than ever. And it has grown with me in my advancing years, the loneliness of my life. Believe me then, that I come here full of respect for you, and you have given me hope in what I am seeking. But there are good women still left to make life happy. Good women whose lives and whose truths may make good lesson for the children that are to be. I am glad that I may be here of some use to you. For if your husband suffer, he suffer within the range of my study and experience. I promise you that I will gladly do all for him that I can, all to make his life strong and manly, and your life a happy one. Now you must eat. You are overwrought and perhaps over anxious. Husband Jonathan would not like to see you so pale. And what he like not where he love is not to his good. Therefore for his sake you must eat and smile. You have told me all about Lucy, and so now we shall speak of it, lest it distress. We shall not speak of it, lest it distress. I shall stay in Exeter tonight, and for I want to think much over what you have told me, and when I have thought, I will ask you questions, if I may. And then, too, you will tell me of husband Jonathan's trouble, so far as you can, but not yet. You must eat now. Afterwards, you shall tell me all. After lunch, after lunch, when we went back to the drawing room, he said to me, "And now tell me all about him." When it came to speaking to this great learned man, learned, learned man? When it came to speaking to this great learned man, learned, it still feels like learned. When it came to speaking to this great learned man, I began to fear that he would think me a weak fool and Jonathan a madman. This journal is all so strange, and I hesitated to go on, but he was so sweet and kind, and he had promised to help, and I promised him, so I said, "Dr. Van Helsing, what I have to tell you is so queer that you must not laugh at me or my husband. I have been since yesterday in a sort of fever of doubt. You must be kind to me and not think me foolish that I have even half believed some very strange things." He reassured me by his manner as well as his words when he said, "Oh, my oh, my dear, if you only know how strange the matter regarding which I am here, it is you who would laugh. I have learned not to think little of anyone's belief, no matter how strange it be. I have tried to keep an open mind, and it is not the ordinary things of life that could close, but the strange things, the extraordinary things, the things that make one doubt if they'll be mad or sane." Thank you. Thank you 1,000 times. You have taken a weight off my mind. If you will let me, I shall give you a paper to read. It is long, but I have typewritten it out. It will tell you my trouble and Jonathan's. It is the copy of his journal when abroad, and all that happened. I dare not say anything of it. You will read for yourself and judge, and then when I see you, perhaps you will be very kind and tell me what you think. "I promise," he said as I gave him the papers. I shall in the morning, so soon as I can, come to see you and your husband, if I may. Jonathan will be here at 11:30, and you must come to lunch with us and see him then. You could catch the quick 3:34 train, which will leave you at Paddington before 8. He was surprised at my knowledge of the trains offhand, but he does not know that I have made up all the trains to and from Exeter, so that I may help Jonathan in case he is in a hurry. So he took the papers with him and went away, and I sit here thinking I don't know what. Letter by hand, Van Helsing to Mrs. Harker,
25 September, 6 o'clock. Dear Madam Mina, I have read your husband's so wonderful diary. You may sleep without doubt. Strange and terrible it is true. I will pledge my life on it. It may be verse for others, but for him and for you there it is no dread. He is a noble fellow, and let me tell you from experience of men that one who would do as he did is going down that wall and into the room, aye, and going a second time, is is not one to be injured in permanence by shock. His brain and his heart are all right, this I swear. Before I have even seen him, so be at rest. I shall have much to ask him of other things. I am blessed that today I come to see you, for I have learned all at once so much that again I am dazzled more than ever, and I must think. Yours the most faithful, Abraham Van Helsing. Letter, Mrs. Harker to Van Helsing. 25 September, 6:30 p.m. My dear Dr. Van Helsing, 1,000 thanks for your kind letter, which has taken a great weight off my mind. And yet, if it be true, what terrible things there are in the world, and what an awful thing if that man, that monster, be really in London. I fear to think I have this moment whilst writing had a wire from Jonathan saying that he leaves by the 6:25 tonight from Lanston and will be here by 10:18, so that I shall have no fear tonight. Will you, therefore, instead of lunching with us, please come to breakfast at 8? At 8 o'clock, if this be not too early for you. You can get away if you are in a hurry by the 10:30 train, which will bring you to Paddington by 2:35. Do not answer this, as I shall take it that if I do not hear, you will come to breakfast. Believe me, your faithful and grateful friend, Mina Harker. Jonathan Harker's Journal. Oh, it's been a minute since I've done nothing but Jonathan. It's like chapter 1, which was like multiple chapters ago. 26 September. I thought never to write in this diary again, but the time has come. When I got home last night, Mina had supper ready, and when we had supped, she told me of Van Helsing's visit, and of her having given him the 2 diaries copied out, and of how anxious she has been about me. She showed me in the doctor's letter that I'm guessing that that letter has just completely been obliterated. She showed me in the doctor's letter that all I wrote down was true. It seemed to have made a new man of me. It was the doubt as the reality of the whole. It was the doubt as to the reality of the whole thing that knocked me over. I felt impotent, and in the dark and distrustful. But now that I know, I am not afraid even of the Count. He has succeeded after all, then, in his design in getting to London. And it was he I saw. He has got younger. And how? Van Helsing is the man to unmask him and hunt him out. If he is anything like what Mina says. We sat late and talked it all over. Mina is dressing. I shall call at the hotel in a few minutes and bring him over. He was, I think, surprised to see me. When I came into the room where he was and introduced myself, he took me by the shoulder and turned my face round to the light and said, after a sharp scrutiny, "But Madam Mina told me you were ill, that you had had a shock." It was so funny to hear my wife called Madam Mina by this kindly, strong-faced old man. I smiled and said, I was ill. I have had a shock, but you have cured me already. And how? By your letter to Mina last night I was in doubt, and then everything took a hue of unreality. I did not know what to trust, even the evidence of my own senses. Not knowing what to trust, I did not know what to do, and so had only to keep on working in what had hitherto been the groove of my life. The groove ceased to avail me, and I mistrusted myself. Doctor, you don't know what it is to doubt everything, even yourself. No, you don't. You couldn't with eyebrows like yours. He seemed pleased and laughed as he said, "So you are a physiognomist. I learn more here with each hour. I am with so much pleasure coming to you to breakfast. And oh, sir, you will pardon praise from an old man, but you are blessed in your wife." I would listen to him go on praising Mina for a day, so I simply nodded and stood silent. She is one of God's women. Okay. she She is one of God's women, fashioned by his own hand to show us men and other women that there is heaven where we can enter, and that its light can be here on earth, so true, so sweet, so noble, so little an ego, that, let me tell you, is much in this age, so skeptical and selfish. And you, sir, I have read all the letters to poor Miss Lucy, and some of them speak of you, so I know you sent some days from knowing of others. But I have seen your true self since. But I have seen your true self since last night. You will give me your hand, will you not? And let us be friends for all our lives. We shook hands, and he was so earnest and so kind that it made me quite chalky. And now, and now, he said, and now, he said, may I ask you for some more help? I have a great task to do, and at the beginning it is to know you can help me there. You can help me here. Can you tell me what went before you're going to Transylvania? Later on, I may ask more help and of a different kind, but at first this will do. Look here, sir, I said. Does what you have to do concern the Count? It does, he said solemnly. Then I am with you, heart and soul. As you go by the 10:30 train, you will not have time to read them, but I shall get the bundle of papers. You can take them with you and read them in the train. After breakfast, I saw him to the station. When we were parting, he said, perhaps you will come to town if I send to you, and take Madame Mina too. We shall both come when you will, I said. I had got him the morning papers and London papers of the previous night, and while we were talking at the carriage window, waiting for the train to start, he was turning them over. His eyes suddenly seemed to catch something in one of them. The Westminster Gazette. I knew it by the color, and he grew quite white. He read something intensely, groaning to himself. Mein Gott, so soon, so soon! I do not think he remembered me at that moment. Just then the whistle blew and the train moved off. This recalled him to himself, and he leaned out the window and waved his hand, calling out, Love to Madam Mina, I shall write so soon as ever I can. 26 September. Oh, Dr. Seward's diary. 26 September. 26 September. Truly, there is no such thing as finality. Not a week since I said fini, and yet here I am starting fresh again, or rather going on with the same record. Until this afternoon, I had no cause to think of what is done. Renfield had become, to all intents, as sane as he ever was. He was already well ahead with his fly business, and he had just started in the spider line also. So he had not been of any trouble to me. I had a letter from Arthur, written on Sunday, and from it I gather that he is bearing up wonderfully well. Quincy Morris is with him, and that is much of help. for he himself for he himself is a bubbling well of good spirits. Quincy wrote me a line too, and from him I hear that Arthur is beginning to recover something of his old buoyancy. So as to them all my mind is at rest. So as to them all my mind is at rest. As for myself, I settle down to my work with the enthusiasm which I used to have for it, so that I might fairly have said that the wound which poor Lucy left on me was becoming, I don't even begin to know what that word is. Cicatrice. I'm gonna have to Google it. Cicatrized. 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 Blah 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 blah. I might fairly have said that the wound which poor Lucy left on me was becoming cicatrized. Everything is, however, now reopened, and what is to be the end, God only knows. I have an idea that Van Helsing thinks he knows too, but he will only let out enough at a time to whet curiosity. He went to Exeter yesterday and stayed there all night. Today he came back and almost bounded into the room at about 5:30 and thrust last night's Westminster Gazette into my hand. "What do you think of that?" he asked as he stood back and folded his arms. I looked over the paper, for I really did not know what he meant, but he took it from me and pointed out a paragraph about children being decoyed away at Hampstead. It did not convey much to me until I reached a passage where it described small puncture wounds on their throats. An idea struck me, and I looked up. "Well?" "Well," he said, it, it is like poor Lucy's." "And what do you make of it?" "Simply that there is some cause in common. Whatever it is that injured her has injured them." I did not quite understand his answer.
"That is true indirectly, but not directly."
"How do you mean, Professor?" I asked. I was a little inclined to take his seriousness lightly, for after all, 4 days of rest and freedom from burning, harrowing anxiety does not help to restore one's spirits. But when I saw his face, it sobered me. Never, even in the midst of our despair about poor Lucy, had he looked more stern. "Tell me," I said. "I can hazard no opinion. I do not know what to think, and have no data on which to found a conjecture."
"Do you mean to tell me, friend Jean, that you have no suspicion as to what poor Lucy died of, not after all the hints given, not only by events, but by me?"
"Of nervous prostration following on great loss or waste of blood?"
"And how the blood lost or waste?"
I shook my head. He stepped over and sat down beside me and went on.
"You are a clever man, friend John. You reason well, and your wit is bold, but you are too prejudiced. You do not let your eyes see, nor your ears hear, and that which is outside your daily life is not of account to you. You do not think that there are things which you cannot understand, and yet which are, that some people see things that others cannot, but there are things old and new which must not be contemplated by men's eyes, because they know, or they think they know, some things which other men have told them. It is the fault of our science that is wants to explain all, and if it explain not, then it says there is nothing to explain. But yet we see around us every day the growth of new beliefs which think themselves new, and which are yet but the old, which pretend to be young, which, like the fine ladies at the opera, I suppose now you do not believe in corporeal transference, no, nor in materialization, no, nor in astral bodies, no, nor in the reading of thought, no, nor in hypnotism.
Yes, I said. Charcut. Carcut has proved that pretty well. He smiled as he went on.
Then you are satisfied as to it. Yes? And of course then you understand how it acts and can follow the mind of the great Carcut. Alas, that he is no more. Into the very soul of the patient that he influenced. No. Then, friend John, am I to take it that you simply cannot, that you simply accept fact and are satisfied to let from premise to conclusion it be a blank? No? Then tell me, for I am student of the brain, how you accept the hypnotism and reject the thought reading. Let me tell you, my friend, that there are things done today in electrical science which would have deemed unholy by the very men who discovered electricity, who would themselves not so long before have been burned as wizards. There are always mysteries in life. Why was it that Methuselah lived 900 years and old Pa 169? And yet that poor Lucy, with 4 men's blood in her poor veins, could not live even one day. For had she lived one more day, we could have saved her. Do you know all of the mystery of life and death? And death? Do you know the altogether of comparative anatomy, and can say therefore the qualities of brutes are in some men and not in others? Can you tell me why when other spiders die small and soon, that one great spider lived for
I'm somehow getting Frencher as this is going on. I need to dial that, like pull that in just a bit.
Can you tell? Can you tell me why, when other spiders die small and soon, that one great spider lived for centuries in the tower of the old Spanish church and grew till, on descending, he could drink the oil of all the church lamps? Can you tell me why, in the pampas, aye, and elsewhere, there are bats that come at night and open the veins of cattle and horses and suck dry their veins? How in some islands of the western seas, there are bats which hang on trees all day, and those who have seen describe as like giant nuts or pods, and that when the sailors sleep on the deck, because it is hot, flit down on them, and then in the morning are found dead men, white as even Miss Lucy was.
Good God, Good God, Professor, I said, starting up. Do you mean to tell me that Lucy was bitten by such a bat, and that such a thing is here in London in the 19th century? He waved his hand for silence and went on.
Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why the tortoise lives more than one generations of men? Why the elephant goes on and on till he have seen dynasties? Why the parrot never die only of bite of cat or dog or other complaint? Can you tell me why men believe in all ages and places that there are some few who live on always, if they be permit, that there are men and women who cannot die?
We all know, because science has vouched for the fact
that there have been toads shut up in the rocks for thousands of years, shut in one so small hole that only hold him since the youth of the world. Can you tell me how the Indian fakir can make himself to die and have been buried and his grave scaled and corn sown on it, and the corn reaped and be cut and sown and reaped and cut again, and then men come and take the unbroken seal, and that There lie the Indian fakir, not dead, but that rise up and walk amongst them as before.
Here I interrupted him. I was getting bewildered. He so crowded on my mind his list of nature's eccentricities and possible possibilities that my imagination was getting fired. I had a dim idea that he was teaching me some lesson as long ago he used to do in his study at Amsterdam. But he used then to tell me the thing so that I could have the object of thought in mind all the time. But now I was without his help, yet I wanted to follow him, so I said, Professor, let me be your pet student again. Pet student again. Tell me the thesis, so that I may apply your knowledge as you go on. At present, I am going in my mind from point to point as a madman, and not a sane one, follows an idea. I feel like a novice lumbering through a bog in a mist, jumping from one tussock to another in the mere blind effort to move on without knowing where I am going.
That is good, Image, he said. Well, I shall tell you. My thesis is this. I want you to believe.
To believe what?
To believe in things that you cannot. Let me illustrate. I heard once of an American who is so defined faith, that faculty which enables us to believe in things which we know to be untrue. For one, I follow that man. He meant that we should have an open mind and not a little bit of truth. Check the rush of a big truth, like a small rock does a railway truck. We get the small truth first. Good. We keep him and we value him. And we value him. But all the same, we must not let him think himself all the truth in the universe.
Then you want me not to let some previous conviction injure the receptivity of my mind with regard to some strange matter. Do I read your lesson aright?
Aye! You are my favorite pupil still. It is worth to teach you. Now that you are willing to understand, you have taken the first step to understand. You think then that those so small holes in the children's throats were made by the same that made the hole in Miss Lucy?
I suppose so. He stood up and said solemnly,
Then you are wrong. Oh, would it were so, but alas, no, it is worse. Far, far worse.
In God's name, Professor Van Helsing, what do you mean? I cried. He threw himself with a despairing gesture into a chair and placed his elbows on the table, covering his face with his hands as he spoke.
They were made by Miss Lucy.
Dun dun dun. Woo! That was wild. Okay, chapter 14 was fun. It was a lot of fun. I do love the Doctor. Dr. Van Helsing is just such a character. Yeah. Dun dun dun. They were made by Miss Lucy. Tell the papers. Oh no, Miss Lucy's gone on a rampage. At least she's not killing the children. Hey, small takeaway, I guess.
The Bloofer lady. The Bloofer lady took me away.
You know, it was wild. That was wild. It was a good chapter too. And I'm so happy to report we are now past halfway through the book. Oh man, that was a wild ride. We're 3.5 hours in. I think I'm gonna call it here for tonight because I have to read again tomorrow. Same great time, same great channel. Once again, this is Vexing Cat. Thank you to one and all that stopped by to listen to me today. I will be returning tomorrow for hopefully 3 to 4 more chapters. I'll see how I'm feeling. We are cooking. I love the progress that we're making. And once again, once they are ready, the chapters will be available individually and up on YouTube. And I'm looking forward to all of you that stopped by saying hello or following me or checking out my other content um, through my link tree. Let's see here. Yeah, that's the one. So if you click on my link tree, I'm still new to this, so forgive me. I've got my Twitter on there. I've got my YouTube on there. And of course, I've got TikTok on there too, but I haven't started posting enough content yet to really start pushing onto that social as of yet. But once again, I want to bid you all a fond and fair good evening, and I appreciate all of you that stopped by to listen. And if you're available tomorrow evening, or if you're not caught up in your own spooky Halloween shenanigans this weekend, you will catch me at 7 p.m. EST Saturday and Sunday for another 2 to 3 hour installment of Bram Stoker's Dracula. So, all of you have a wonderful evening, and I will catch you next time.